Mm-hmm.
It's the first time that I have what I feel like is a conscious moment, at least in retrospect, since being knocked out. And I sort of am seeing kind of these blocks of color. I kind of feel like I just have in my head. I'm just kind of this sense of just like my head. I feel blocks of color and this kind of symphonic music.
Mm-hmm.
It's bright and colorful. These cascading tiles of color are sort of spilling away from me. The music sort of crescendoing and growing and sort of symphonic. It's getting brighter.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm having this moment, and I think to myself, so I have this thought, is this what it feels like to die?
Oh.
Welcome to the Trail Success Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Trail Success Podcast. My name is Mark Fries, and I'm excited to be here today. Maybe even more excited is that today we have a guest host in Dag Hinrichs.
Yes, sir.
20-plus year friend of mine. Super excited for Dag to guest host the podcast today. I'm not sure. And the reason for that is that apparently I'm the guest.
You're the guest.
On my own podcast. I think if you look in, only because my wife works in counseling and social work, there's a manual for diagnosing different disorders. So I'm not sure if under narcissism, it's like one of the key symptoms is that you start a podcast and you're a guest within the first 5 episodes. That might be near the top of the list. So
that might be a threshold, a new threshold, a podcast definition threshold.
The definition of navel gazing is be a guest on your own podcast. I get a chance to be a guest on the Trail Success Podcast today, and Dag will be our guest host. But as we'll get into a little bit more in a moment, I've got about 6 seasons of trail running, ultramarathon experience under my belt. And so I'm super excited, primarily on the Trail Success Podcast, to talk with individuals who are out there staying fit, being in the arena, trail running, participating in races, activities, while they balance relationships and jobs and other responsibilities that, use up their time as well. So that's really sort of the purpose and goal of the Trail Success Podcast. We hope to share a little bit of that today. So that's a bit of the intro.
I'm also excited to be here.
Awesome.
But
yes,
not to be a podcast narcissist enabler.
That's right.
I'm actually really excited to be here because I think this is a unique conversation for 2 reasons.
Okay.
First reason, 240-mile run.
Yep, that's kind of part of
right.
what
That's the distance.
Yeah, the Moab 240 is kind of the punchline of the podcast is revisiting that experience.
Okay, so 240-mile run. That's not normal. So I look forward to unpacking that.
Awesome.
And number 2, that this experience produced a life flight to a different finish line.
Yeah.
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 Now, I actually think this probably puts you in an end of small number. Not many humans in the history of the planet have been in an ultra race and gotten an alternative finish line via a helicopter trip.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that. Let's do that. Shall we get into...
Well, I'll turn the time over to you. I am now in guest mode, and I'll leave the podcast in your able hands.
Well, I think I don't know how much your audience has your background in their minds.
Yeah.
Should we just unpack that a little bit?
Yeah,
I don't know how deep you want to go on it, but maybe we can just get a little bit of bearing. So you've been running ultras for how long now?
About 6 years.
Okay.
It's 2017. Actually, Thanksgiving 2016.
Okay.
I was as heavy and out of shape as I'd ever been. And well, I'd been a lifetime athlete all the way from junior high until my middle-aged years. I found myself a few years off of any real events or activities, and I had gotten wildly out of shape and felt not good. And so that's when I put my first ultra event on the calendar for the Hag Lake Mud Run in February 2017.
How long was that event in terms of time?
From the race itself.
Yeah.
I thought I would do the 25K and accidentally signed up for the 50K, but I called the race director. I'm like, I'm only going to do 25 one loop. And she's like, that's fine. You'll get a DNF, but that's totally fine. Come and do that. And she's like, and maybe you'll be inspired to do 2.
Okay.
Which I ended up doing.
So you did 2.
Took 7 hours, 45 minutes, close to 8 hours for a 50K. So 31 miles, kind of off the couch. I was 210 pounds, right? As heavy as I'd been, and looked at in the photos and the video, right? Like, wasn't very fit, but it was a compelling experience, and I came back for more.
Okay, so you entered into this just to get a handle on feeling like you had a pathway to fitness.
Yeah, I have struggled historically maintaining a fitness regimen without an event, a goal. So it sort of puts a pin on the board of like, I have this thing in September 18th, and it's February, and what do I have to do between now and then to be ready? Okay. So that kind of gave me the first impetus to do that, and that led to, me really starting to get committed to fitness that spring. So I did 2 or 3 races up to 50-mile distance that first year, 2017. I started to learn about and set my eyes on a couple other races that were known in the space. I started looking at qualifiers for Western States, the oldest 100-miler in the U.S., so I started looking at some qualifiers.
Okay, so already in your first year, you're looking well beyond
I've
3 to 5 hour event.
Trail and ultra stuff for probably 5 years. So I've been watching YouTube videos, podcasts of other athletes, and sort of just jonesing for the experience they were having, and thinking someday maybe I could do the same. Maybe.
Okay.
Right. And so I had some visibility on kind of some of the big races. UTMB Ultra Trail Mont Blanc in Europe was kind of the Super Bowl.
Yes.
And so I set my eyes on that. What would it look like to do a UTMB race, which I did in 2018, the TDS race at UTMB. And in 2018 that was 2019. In 2018, I did my first 100-mile race, the Mountain Lakes 100.
Is that the one we ran together?
And that's the one we ran together.
Yeah.
Dag paced me the last 39 miles.
Yeah.
Which was awesome. First 100-miler, my second year. Third year in Europe at UTMB. So I think, it was... started doing longer distances, more challenging races, and found that without blowing up the rest of my life, it was possible to train for that. And found that really compelling. So that was kind of getting... my feet wet in ultras, and I was probably doing 3 or 4 races a year between 50K and 100-milers. So I have 200-milers under my belt, one sub 24 hour. The one we did together was, I think, a 23:18 100-miler. My second ever was a little bit slower.
But, for your audience, as we sit here, like, it wasn't like you were jumping out of the womb, running, a 26-minute 10K.
No.
So how did you get in your head that this is something I wanted? That's kind of like, it's not like you were getting a ton of signals from society saying, and the world saying, yes, I'm going to go run 100 miles.
Right.
That's like, how did you get to that? Like, I can do the running. I can do this event. Because there's a lot of different things you could do, but you picked the running.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was partly in, some from conversations we've had, maybe some early childhood myelin laid down in the brain. My dad ran. Yeah. So when I was probably 10, 12 years old, he'd take us to a 5K on a weekend, and I'd, muscle through a 5K and kind of, so
you've been around it
as a kid.
Yeah,
I was in cross country in junior high, ran track in high school. Never great, I was fine. I'd run an 800 or 1500, but I was not fast. So I was a mediocre runner. And then in my 20s, I had a couple friends in graduate school who were going to run a marathon. So I trained for a marathon.
Okay.
In grad school when I was here in Portland, and so that was kind of my first kind of endurance.
Did you do it?
Experience?
Did
Yeah.
you? Oh, nice.
So I did like 3 marathons in my 20s.
Okay. And a little hood to coast action in the middle of all
I did
that.
some hood to coast, so I had some experience there. And I think it goes all the way back to my mom telling me, you can do anything you put your mind to. So there's sort of this implant, this seed planted in my mind that whether it's professionally, personally, athletically, right? If you focus time and energy, you can accomplish anything you want. So I'd seen my dad run some distance stuff, and had enough experience watching the body adapt to, to marathon training. Did a couple of triathlons in my 30s. I did a couple half Ironmans in my 30s. So I'd had a little experience with endurance. So I had a sense that my body could adapt.
Yeah.
And I would say the people who I was watching doing ultra stuff on in videos and podcasts, right? They were normal people training.
They were accessible. You could feel like you could relate to what they were doing.
Could relate to what they were doing. They weren't, and these were mid-pack, back of the pack folks, and super grateful for Ginger Runner, Ethan Newberry, and Billy Yang, and some of the other folks who were capturing content 10 years ago of themselves, not only training, but in race. So I could sort of experience what that would look like. And I've always felt like for me running, and I would say running has been my most consistent athletic discipline for my whole life, just because it's easy to walk out the door and go do it. Always feel better after a run. My body feels better. My mind feels better. And I've always felt like running is a microcosm of daily life. You get to choose, am I going to go out and run at all?
Right.
Am I going to push myself and strive to be a little bit better than I was yesterday? Am I going to be disciplined in that activity and make it consistent, do it on a regular basis to actually see improvement? So I think that's very similar to what I've experienced in relationships and in my job and in other disciplines, just to get better. And I think
so part of the fuel
helps
that you've gotten from it is that it has that benefit that ripples out into the rest of your life, like the make your bed in the morning effect kind of thing.
I think it is. I mean,
Okay.
I think 2 things. The adage of keeping promises to yourself, right? So if you're like, I'm going to go work out tomorrow, and you get up and you go do the work, even though when you're first getting up, 2 days ago it was 34 degrees when I got up, and I'm like, oh, really? Am I going to go run 34 degrees in the dark?
Right.
Instead of staying in bed, and you get up and you go and do the work, and afterward you're like, I kept that promise to myself, and that makes a difference.
What kind of difference? What's the material? I mean, because we're about to transition into this conversation or question of okay, how'd you get from there to this next bump? But what is this foundation? What is that benefit you got by being able to get up at 5 a.m. when no one else cares? You're out there in the wind, cold, and rain.
Yeah, I think it's a built habit. It's a practiced habit. So I think it's not something I've always been good at. A lot of that has come this year, actually, in 2022, which has been fun and interesting for me. But I think having a goal, keeping a commitment, and I've always sort of felt like it's just part of it's just willpower. But what I have found to be even more important is that it actually, in doing that, if I think about how do I feel at 9 a.m. when I'm getting ready to start my day and start my work, my family, service to others, and all that, if I can have a meaningful workout in the morning, have a good night's rest, have a meaningful workout, I feel great when I start my day, quote unquote, start my day. And I think I heard someone else say this recently, if I can invest time to have some quiet time, get up early, have some quiet time, exercise, by the time I get to 9 a.m, I basically have the day to be in service to other people, because I've kind of done all the things I need to support my mental health and my physical health, and then I'm in a position to be supportive of others. And so I just feel like that exercise is a way to keep a commitment to myself, support my personal mental and physical health, and then there's the concept of every day do something that scares you a little bit. And if that's kind of the first thing you do in the morning is to walk out into the cold and go do something you're like, oh, this scares me a little. Like, I don't know what this workout's going to look like. It's going to be difficult. It's going to be cold. It's going to be challenging. If you kind of put that in your back pocket by 6:30 in the morning, well, what are two or three other things you might do during the day that you're like, oh, that's a little bit challenging to make that phone call or have that conversation or do that thing.
So I like that theme, and I think that I can relate to that too. This notion of, like, they talk about it in cycling a lot. This idea of marginal gain, where you do these little things that in and of themselves seem inconsequential, but when you stack them up over time, they create a large difference.
Yeah.
And so you're describing this rollover effect from the things that you have to be able to do to train for the event you want to go participate in. It actually has a spillover effect in a positive way in all the other domains of your life.
I think so.
So that's pretty cool. And what you're describing there is this notion of pushing to that next level to find new territory. And I guess that's a good launching point to get us sort of set up for a decision. So why this bump up to do a 240-mile race? And then what did you think you were going to gain more of?
Yeah.
What's the benefit you were thinking that you were going to get more of by doing more miles in an event than just going out and doing another 100-miler?
Great question. I think part of it was the spectrum of ultra experience, right? So you've got everything, kind of the definition is anything over a marathon. So that ultra marathon concept is anything over 26.2 miles, starting at 50 kilometers or 31. So I'd done 50K, 50 miles, 100K, 100 miles. There isn't really anything in between that, right? So there's a handful of 200s, and then there's a couple that are just a little bit more than that, right? So
are you operating with an algorithm that just says X miles times X gives me benefit in the rest of my life?
No,
like, are you thinking of it that way?
I think part of it was, I think the ultra experience is really compelling. And so what does it look like to do a 200? It was unknown, right?
Okay, so let's do a setup on this. I want to understand how in the because I remember the first time I heard you say this. Because I think it's on you to explain why it's not stupid.
Yeah.
Like, why is this not a dumb idea? Like, 240 miles, like, that's a long way, and I think it takes a ton of time, and I think it would be easy for people to conclude that, oh, well, like, this is stupid definition is sitting in the beginning of this, like, conversation. We ended up on a different finish line.
Yeah.
So why did you come to this and think, okay, this is a good idea for me because I am ready for that. I'm going to go do these things. I will get this benefit. The risk reward, the payoff on it will be worth it.
Yeah.
Because it's a big investment. It's not just small investment. It's a big investment. Time, energy.
Big investment. I think, well, I have a sense, and I'm not always good at doing this in other aspects of my life, but I think there's something compelling about what is the next sort of layer of competency.
And so you're just reading the next news article on 240. Courtney Dauwalter wins it. Wow. Well, I should go run that thing too. Was it just sort of filtered into you, or did you hear a cool story that someone told you? Like, how did you actually come to think?
Yeah, I'd heard
I could be
everything from the Joe Rogan interview with Courtney Dauwalter to a brother-in-law of a friend who did the Moab 240 a year ago. I had a phone call with him and talked with him about his personal experience. But, I'd heard about the 200s for a few years, and I'm kind of like, would I ever step up to that level? And part of it is just sort of the question of, like, it's the concept of what is our capacity for human development? What's our capacity for growth? And that was kind of the next level, right? So I've demonstrated I can do 100. Is the human body and mind, is my human body and mind capable of going to the next level? And so that just felt like an interesting challenge. Now, behind all this is that I turn 50 in a couple of months. Thank you. And so part of this was as sort of a milestone year before I turn 50. It's kind of like, can I pretend that Father Time isn't chasing me down? And can I do a couple of interesting athletic events this year? Right. That kind of demonstrate that I still have capacity to perform athletically.
You're in there.
I'm still in the arena. Yeah. We're still out there swinging at life, and so that was a big part of it. Was getting an opportunity to demonstrate that I could still do things athletically. So I had a half Ironman on the calendar for July, which I completed. I had a 50K earlier in the year, but the big 2 events were the Moab 240 and then a full Ironman in November. And we can get to what that looks like later on. But those were kind of the pre-turning 50 in December activities that were getting me excited to kind of do that.
Okay, so then how does that decision go? It's one thing to investigate, and then how did you get to like having the conversation with your wife, or you deciding in your head? Like, how did you just flip over to saying, okay, I'm committing to this, I'm going to try?
Yeah, and it was interesting in that, I kind of started floating the idea, a year ago.
Okay.
But I think, and it definitely in sharing it with Janae, and she didn't use this word right, but in sharing it with friends and family and others, right, there's always, when you talk about doing an ultra, there's always a conversation around that. And usually, there's phrases like, I don't even like to drive 100 miles, or you're crazy, or,
Right.
Why would you ever choose to do that? And that certainly went up about 8 notches with a 240, right? Like it just, and because it moves into a realm of, I can't even imagine. And even for me, it was like, I can't even imagine, like, what does it look like to move over multiple days? I'd never done anything over like the UTMB race took me 40 and a half hours, 40 hours, 35 minutes. So I had a concept of 2 days, but multiple day activity. And so bless Janae's heart, she's been supportive of what I call my crazies, right, to be involved in these activities. And so she was supportive of, I don't know, but okay, give it a try, or, so she was supportive of that. The interesting caveat was that this was, as most ultras are now, it was a lottery based
Right. Hard to get
sign
in.
up.
Yeah.
So I was on a wait list. So I was not even technically in the race for the whole year. I did not get accepted into the race until like September 10th.
Okay, and the race was what date?
October 7th.
Okay, so less than a month out, you got confirmation.
Yeah, so I'm basically from I think the race registration was in January, February, the lottery. So for 8-9 months, I am speaking as if I'm in the race, and I will say, "Oh, I'm running the Moab 240." "Oh, you got in?" And I'll be like, "No, I'm on the wait list." "Well, how do you know you're going to get them?" And so I just manifested it.
Right, made it happen.
And kept myself accountable to train as if I was going to get in.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute. I think this is cool. So what did, like, it's not 100, it's more than double. And so how did you get yourself, give me just some quick ticking highlights of what you did different this year, knowing that you were going to shoot for that, let's say in January, that set you up to so that you thought, okay, I think I can complete this thing.
Yeah. Well, some of the encouraging news when I had talked to folks who'd done a 200 is they said, well, you can't train, you can. They said I didn't train a lot differently for a 200 miler than I did for a 100 miler. So that gave me some confidence that, like, because my training load is pretty light. I have a family.
Yeah.
I have a full-time job.
Yeah.
I do nonprofit work through church and some other nonprofit organizations. So I don't have a ton of time. And I would say in prior years, I was probably training 15 to 25 hours a month, not a week, but like a month, and doing these events, right? So I was trying to find a balance there. But I went into 2022 having had some challenging health stuff end of 2021. I'd had kind of an issue where I had some welts and hives showing up on my skin. And after a 100 miler in September, I had a couple of bee stings, and afterward, I got some hives on my skin, and then some swelling on my head, and with kind of welts on my head, and then some swelling on my lips and my mouth. So I went and saw a doctor, and so I had some health issues going into 2022. And part of the compelling thing there is some of the medicine they prescribed to sort of get that inflammation under control.
Like, how would this present? Like, if you went and, like, how would all of a sudden you be in the middle of this?
So on a daily basis, let's say I went, I went and worked out. Maybe I wore my running pack or something, right? I would see welts kind of where my straps were at. So I'd see like a red kind of patch, on my skin that would be slightly raised up, a little bit itchy, just mostly annoying more than anything. But then where it was challenging is if it moved up above, under my scalp and under my hair, I'd have like, kind of looked like I'd been hit over the head, like bumps, right?
Okay.
And my lips would swell up like someone had punched me.
Oh, looks like Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah. So did it affect your training?
For sure. I mean, I was basically because the race was in September, and kind of flared up in early October. So kind of November,
flared
December.
up like I'm in bed or...
No, and I would get some swelling in my lips and even in my mouth. And a couple of times I felt like my throat was a little bit swollen. So I went to see the doctor, and so that was concerning. And
Did it change? Did it alter your training? Did it slow you up?
Yeah, I basically kind of stopped training from mid-October to January 1.
Oh,
yeah.
So you took time off last fall.
I took some time off. I finished a 100-miler.
To deal with this, like...
I ran
what
the
did they
Portland
call it?
Marathon. I was a minute off of Boston qualifying for 45 to 49, so I ran a quickest marathon, PR'd my marathon time at age 49, which was cool.
Good job.
48. And so they gave me meds. It ramped up my appetite kind of crazy. I gained a bunch of weight in 2 months.
What is it, the thing that they called it?
It's spontaneous idiopathic urticaria, which means it happens for unknown reasons randomly, and it's urticaria is welts or hives. So you might know them as hives, right? So, it was an annoyance when it was kind of in my chest or abdomen or things like that on my skin, but it got concerning when it was up in my head and in my mouth and throat.
Okay.
And so they gave me meds for a couple of months to try and bring that inflammation way down, which it ultimately did, and then I could manage it with like antihistamines.
And I remember you by January coming back online and feeling like, okay, here we go. And then you had a really good first half of the year, right?
Yeah, I think the compelling thing. So that was sort of the lead up, and I went back up to 210 pounds. So I was probably at 180, 185 fighting weight last season, like when I was running. So massive appetite increase with some of the meds they had me on, and I was probably a little lazy in my nutrition post disciplined season of healthy eating. But what was compelling about the new year is, you reached out to me and said, "Hey, I'm thinking about getting a Wahoo Kicker trainer, indoor bike trainer.
No one runs you over
to put the bike on." Yeah. It's raining and it's cold in Oregon.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of doing this, and I was like, I've been thinking about one of those for a couple years.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll put that on my Christmas list.
Yeah.
And so that was my Christmas gift from my wife, and it's sitting over here, and that was a game changer.
How so?
A couple of reasons. I had sort of adopted a concept that I heard from a coach when I was first doing ultra running, of doing kind of seasons. I was always sort of inspired by this idea that I'd hear from athletes where like, I'm working on a project. And I was always like, you're working on a project. Yeah, I'm going to go climb this mountain. I'm going to go do this race. I'm going to go have this adventure. And so they would kind of
campaign or something.
Yeah, it was a project. It was, I'm working on this for 9 months. I'm going to invest tens, if not hundreds of hours in logistics and gear and planning and organization and training. So that was always sort of compelling to me. And so I think, but I was also felt like this coach had sort of said, I encourage my athletes to have an off season.
Okay.
Not necessarily working out 12 months a year, especially running, just for kind of wear and tear on the body. You get overtraining syndrome, injuries, etc. Right. So I'd often take 4 to 6 months off, which was nice for sort of mental and physical. But I would let things slide. So I'd not maintain good nutrition. I wouldn't maintain a exercise routine. So then I gained a bunch of weight. It'd take a ton to get back to health, right? And fitness. So even though I gained some weight, I'd only really been off for about 6 or 8 weeks. Okay. And so some of that cardiovascular fitness was there. But I think the game changer was cross training.
Okay.
So being on the bike and not on my feet.
So this was a step change in your approach.
It was
a strategic difference.
I had ridden in the past, but I've not been a cyclist, right? So I'd done a couple of triathlons. So Did
it change, like, if you were just to get us like set up, because I want to get to race day, because I want to find out what happens on race day. But let's tick through some of the things that it was and was not, like, leading up to this. So, but previously, it didn't sound like you changed your hours in a huge way, or did you this last year?
I did increase volume, but I would say what changed most importantly for me, which I've heard for years that I've never been able to master, is I became a morning person.
Oh,
so
good.
That was game changer. So what was the label game changing stuff was, and that was in part thanks to accountability partner with you. And ultimately making that commitment to myself was, I want to increase my volume, but I don't want to impact a lot of family time.
Right.
And so when can I find time when I'm not going to impact family time? And the answer was, well, between 5 and 7 a.m.
Yeah.
That was the window for me. So
that's a cool strategy, right? Like, so you picked a zone of a dedicated time that had low friction with the rest of your life.
yeah.
And then when you did that, what you're saying is what was giving you the benefit back was that you'd already been done with more work by 8 o'clock than most people would do in a day.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was my historical practice, right? Where I felt like I was catching up end of day to go work out.
Yeah.
Get some private time to read
Yeah.
or watch a show or
Yeah.
something, right? Getting that done in the morning was really compelling. The other part was the bike was low impact, great cardiovascular workout. And a couple things about that was we not only was there the Kicker Smart Trainer, but it was connecting it up to Zwift.
Yeah.
Right. So what I found compelling about Zwift was it really, and I had heard this for years, but I'd never really practiced it, was the concept of heart rate zone training.
Okay.
So I would say for the previous 5 years of ultra training,
Okay.
I was training in the gray zone.
You were just going out middle miles.
Zone 3,
Okay.
70-80% heart rate.
Yeah.
I got fitness benefit. I got weight benefit out of all of it. And I was able to do these events, but it wasn't smart training. It was just, I'm just going to go out the door, push myself. Probably I'd peek into zone 4 every once in a while during those workouts.
So it's become fashion to call that junk miles now.
They were junk miles that produced some benefit, but they weren't actually creating the right physiological change for either aerobic or anaerobic energy streams.
So you were getting the cost, but not the adaptive benefit.
It spilled over.
Yeah,
right? It happened,
Yeah.
but not in an effective way. So the zone, getting into Zwift was some of the specific workouts that would focus on a zone 2, and this is where we can get in this concept of polarized training of zone 1, zone 2 workouts, zone 4, zone 5 workouts that were training aerobic or anaerobic energy systems respectively. That was something I had heard but never really knew how to execute in my workouts.
It's pretty remarkable.
So the bike made that very measurable.
Give me one. Yeah, so the bike really helped you anchor that concept. So
Yeah.
give me a payoff. Like, how did you know, like, between January and July that this new structured approach to training on a polarized, spectrum, below LT1 and above LT2, or at LT2. Like, give me a little, like, what? How did you know?
Yeah,
like, what was a payoff?
Some definition there, right? With good credit to folks that we've listened to and appreciate a lot, Dr. Seiler, this concept of polarized training and how I'm defining that, right, without being an expert, right? And this is in part from a podcast I heard from Camille Herron as well. Is, as a amazing female athlete who I think is 40, who's breaking all kinds of ultra distance records, a lot on the road, some on the trail, but she is doing 80 to 85% of her total training time in zone 1, zone 2 heart rate.
So give me, like, say you have a heart rate max of 200. Where would that be?
Yeah, so my max is like 185, and that would put me in the sub 140, 145 range.
Got it.
So I'm probably 120 to 145.
Got it.
80-85% of training time, and then 1 or 2 workouts a week, right? Or 15 to 20% of total training time in zone 4, zone 5. And that reduced overall stress on the body. Recovery was faster. Fatigue was less significant.
It's counterintuitive. You think it doesn't work, like it can't be working because you're not killing yourself. So not only is the stress on the body low, but you don't have that same perceived effort. So how it is remarkable what goes on. So tell me, like, when
I knew.
Yeah, I want to hear.
I have 6 years of data in Strava because I've been tracking every run for 6 years with heart rate monitor.
Okay, so in real life.
Yep. So I've got, and I'll put it on the screen here in the corner for the podcast, but I've been tracking a fitness, freshness, form level, which is how Strava defines it. And there's good science behind it, how to measure that. But essentially I can see on an annual basis my level of fitness.
Right. And
against that, how fatigued I am based on how much what kind of stress level I'm putting on my body on a weekly basis. And that gives you a form or kind of, how prepared your body is for an event, right? And in building up fitness, you should be a -20, -30 form, and ready for race day as a positive 20, 30 after a 2-week taper, right? There's lots of science behind it, but in most seasons, I'd be in the 40s and 50s on a fitness scale. My highest years were kind of 60s. Okay. 1 or 2 years I was in the 60s, and this might only be for a 2 or 3 month block, right? I would.
That was your peak.
That'd be my peak, and I'd kind of go April to July, heavy training, get up in the 60s, have a 3 or 4 month race season, and then drop way back down.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was starting at a little bit higher level because I'd not had as much of a break in 2021, but I was moving up into the 70s and getting up to the 80s.
So you were seeing
fitness,
it in your data. And
in the data.
Now give it to me, like how that translated and what kind of how that felt. I want to hear like an example. Did you have a run where you noticed like, okay, this is different? I'm in a new place. I've never been here before. I'm faster, I'm better, I'm stronger, I'm more durable. Like how did it manifest for you?
Yeah, I think the data was helpful, and it tended to match the way I felt working out. Now, maybe it was, part of the challenge is because I'm doing mostly zone 1, zone 2, it's not as if I'm getting a Strava segment PR. Certainly no KOMs going on, right? Like, so I'm not necessarily seeing speediness. Now, that one tempo workout a week, right?
Yeah, so tell me about that.
I would see PR segments, right? Or I would see segments with great scores, or I would just feel, I would feel punchy or, spicy or energetic on the run.
Was there one run or bike ride that you did where like you could see a segment time, you could see that your heart rate on that run at that time, let's say it was a 4-minute segment, and I did it at 155 or 165 at heart rate. But today I did it, and my heart rate was the same 4-minute time, but I was at 120.
Yeah, I can't think of any like specific run where this light bulb went off, but what I would see is exactly what you're describing. I would compare, right? So Strava also is, for those who don't know, Strava kind of athlete social platform to capture all your workouts, right? As sort of a training journal and sharing with friends and followers. We'll show similar runs. So it'll be like, here's your trend for this loop. So I've got a half dozen loops here near my home that I'll run. And so it will say, this run compared to others, you ran it faster.
Yeah.
I could also look at, my average heart rate was lower.
Yeah.
The relative effort was lower. So here's a similar time 6 months ago, but my relative effort was half as much because my body's having to put out less effort to achieve a
same
similar
external
cost.
Load, internal load is lower.
So those variables between relative effort, heart rate, or time, usually one of those would be better than previous efforts.
Okay.
Depending on what I was focusing on that day. So I was seeing data, and the only reason that data is meaningful for me at all, that fitness, freshness, form function in Strava, is that it tends to match how I feel.
Okay, so you had good baseline that was showing you were several layers or several levels above where you had been in the past, and you felt better doing what you were doing.
Yep.
So let's start. Tell me a little bit about my strategy for this race. Let's talk about the strategy a little bit, and then maybe we get right into game day. How do we feel? Like we're about to start this thing, 240 miles. Okay, but tell me what your strategy was, because I remember talking with you about it. You had a very clear idea about what you wanted to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so I think, part of that strategy was just the right training getting up to it. So it was, sort of volume. So part of that was I probably close to doubled volume from a time perspective.
Yeah.
But if you look back at my monthly training numbers, they're generally in the 30 to 40 hours a month.
Yeah.
And what does that translate into miles? I was riding, I was running, I was doing a little bit of swimming for some of the tri stuff that I was interested in doing, some open water swimming, but I was probably running 20 to 40 miles a week. Not huge volume, right? So sort of that prep was consistency. So I was working out 5 or 6 days a week with kind of a Sunday recovery day. So I would say the other layers of that prep really in getting ready for that strategy was layering not only morning workouts, more consistent on a daily basis, cross-training across a number of disciplines, but also focusing on recovery. So I really tried to improve my nutrition profile. Okay. So I went mostly plant-based. I didn't carve out all meat, so it was largely plant-based during the year to kind of test that out.
Did it make a difference for you?
I think so. I think between polarized training with less overall stress on the body on per workout, plant-based nutrition felt like that helped recovery a little bit.
Ate a little better.
Ate better.
Or different.
Different.
Let's put it that way. Yeah.
the other concept with morning stuff is that it required me to get better sleep and get to sleep earlier.
Okay, so sleep.
The recovery
And
profile was important.
You have a tendency to be a sleep abuser.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have the capacity to stay up.
Yeah, so I can manage sleep deprivation okay, and historically I also would stay up late.
Yeah, all the time.
And so shifting
Mark, it's bedtime. What are you doing?
Yeah, shifting that was important.
Yeah.
And felt like that was a key contributor. So again, I think this concept of those were key preparation components. Now, from a strategy component.
That strategy mean race strategy?
Race strategy.
Yeah, I want to hear it.
Yeah.
Like this is really interesting because like 240 miles, you can do this a bunch of different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, you might say, well, there's only one way to do it, and that's to go be at start and then you finish it at the end. But like, there are a lot of different approaches to how you think about it and have your brain set up for this. So tell me how you came to your strategy. 240 miles.
I'd watched a number of videos online. Again, big thanks to folks like Tony Klein and Training for Ultra and some other folks who had, West Plate, who had videotaped their experience running the Moab 240. And that just gives you kind of a firsthand exposure to what their experience looks like.
Okay. What did you pull out of those? Like when you were looking at those videos, like was it like, oh, they look really strong here, or they're sleeping longer, or they're eating more, or they're eating less, it's timed differently than I would have thought? Like, what were the things you picked up?
I think one key adage for most ultras, right, like is if you think you're going out slow enough, slow down even more. Now I'm a mid-pack, back-a-pack kind of guy, so it's not like I'm out leading in the race, right? So, and each time I step up in distance, I still have this sort of big question in my mind, like, can I actually finish this distance? So there's always a confidence factor of like, how conservative do I need to be up front to actually just finish the distance, let alone for some sort of time. I always have some time goals in my mind, but goal A is just finish. So what I had seen is that people had generally gone out too quickly and finished a big block of mileage in the first 24 hours. And for some of them, that caused them to suffer enough in day 2, 3, and 4 that a lot of that was just kind of a slow walk. Okay. And so they felt mental fatigue, physical fatigue. And I was like, what if I can take a more conservative approach to day 1 and 2? One of my goals was, could I move with quality movement in days 3 and 4?
Okay, that's actually a cool strategy. So you were thinking, I want to not necessarily a negative split, but I want to back half my performance. So hold it in the front part and then push it in the second part. But you didn't want to be blowing up at halfway.
Yeah, that was a concern.
I remember you saying that.
Yeah.
You called it the zombie walk. You wanted to avoid the zombie walk. I don't want to be doing that. Like, I don't want to zombie
those
walk.
people out doing it. I mean, it's easy to sit in a chair and be like, oh, they're, but then when I got on course, I found myself walking sections where I was kind of like, when I watched them on a video, I'm like, how come they're not running this? It's flat. It looks easy.
Yeah.
But that strategy spoke to me as far as
you were doing quality walking.
Day 1 and 2, hiking. Okay. And then day 3, day 4, could I have quality movement, which for me probably meant, could I run? Could I maintain a 13 to 17 minute mile while running? That's nothing fast, right? I mean, again, we're talking about 240 miles with a cutoff time of 113 hours. It's literally like 2.1 miles an hour. Most of us could walk faster than that. If you can manage your sleep and your food and all that, do it for 4 days, you can finish.
Those add up some time.
Yeah.
Okay, so your strategy going, so you're prepared, you put yourself in position, you got in, you had a month to get your brain around it. You'd been thinking a strategy, but now you've got your support structure, Janae's down there, you're heading down, and it's game day.
Yeah.
How do you feel? Are you scared as
heck? A little bit of prep ahead of time. The weight, the wait list wasn't moving. It was supposed to sort of move end of August, early September. It wasn't moving, and then all of a sudden it started to move. And so I did get in September 10th, but that meant picking up some final gear stuff. I had most of the gear, but there's
a little bit of mad dashery.
There's some gear mad dash. I do some nonprofit work. I already had a scheduled visit to Africa. So I was in Kenya from September 18th through 29th.
So you even had some disruption on your normal routine.
I got back from
That's not a small disruption. That's
Kenya,
a big disruption. Yeah.
8 days before the race start.
Okay. So 8 days before the race start, you know,
Get back from Africa,
put it all together.
jet lag,
Got it.
a little bit of body fatigue and getting back in the zone, and it's a week from race start, but the race is in southern Utah and I live in Portland, Oregon area, so it's like I get back on Thursday from Africa. We're leaving on Tuesday to drive to southern Utah. So it's a short block.
Are you nervous? Frantic?
Nervous, not frantic, nervous, you know, kind of packing up, getting everything together. But as you know, whether it's a cyclocross race, whether it's an ultramarathon, like just towing the line is a big deal. It feels like it's half the work is just to get there and show up on race day. And so I think ultimately felt like putting the drop bags together, which are, you know, bags that get placed at different aid stations. So you're ready for that. Getting the drop bags together, making sure I had all the right gear. You know, there were a couple of Amazon packages showing up the last couple of days with stuff that I needed that I could pack in there. Felt like I had what I needed. Felt like my training was sufficient. So I kind of had headed into a 2-week taper to kind of let that form number go up a little bit. Fatigue drops faster than fitness declines. So a little bit of fitness decline, bigger fatigue decline. Form goes up so that on race day, I was probably closer to plus 30, plus 40 because I took a little bit more time.
Okay, that's perfect for a big day
where
like
I wanted
that.
to be.
Yeah. So your fitness's form was where it needs to be. You're on the line. You wake up that morning.
Yep.
Are you excited now? Are you
Super excited.
You're not thinking, oh, I shouldn't be doing this.
No, driving the whole way down, and bless my wife's heart, Janae, she decided to crew me, so she's going to go down with me, which was an awesome experience, and she's done that a number of times. So we go down together, nice, you know, drive down to Utah. We get there, you know, I think it's more anything, it's excitement, right? So it's exciting. Obviously,
are you seeing other runners? Like, is everybody like, or are you just totally isolated? You know,
everyone in Moab looks fit. And,
they're all like crushers.
Doing cool stuff, right? Everyone's out crushing, right? But then you go to check in the day before, and you know it's a bit of your tribe, right? So people who've exercised, some people look more fit, some people look less fit. So you're always kind of judging how fit am I compared to the average runner.
Do I fit in this tribe? Yeah. Do I belong here?
In this tribe? Do I belong
I'm
here?
about to do 240. I don't know if I belong.
Yeah. So it is that experience of like the unknown.
Sure.
But there's enough similar that it feels like, oh, I've been here, done that.
Yeah,
I know what this is going to look like generally. Good. But my brain still couldn't wrap around 240 miles.
Why would it, Mark?
You couldn't.
No.
You couldn't.
Okay, so game day, you wake up, you get your stuff.
Yeah.
What time does the race start?
6 a.m.
Oh, it starts at 6 a.m. So you're like trying to get food, hydration.
A little bit of oatmeal.
Got it.
Get some electrolytes. You know, it's another strategy for kind of prep for this whole year is just more hydration, electrolytes on board for kind of cellular level hydration. Yeah. So felt good about all of that. Get to the race start line and feel good and have a sense of my strategy and that I can manage it effectively.
Okay, so you're there, you're on the line, you're prepped, you're ready,
yep.
you have some trepidation, but you're good to go.
Yep.
You're with how many people?
The final race list had 265 people on the list.
Yeah.
They estimate that about 15 of those people probably won't show up on race day, and I think it turned out to be about 30. So about 30 DNS did not start. That puts kind of the race start at about 2:35.
Okay.
On the line, folks, one guy gets up there. One of the runners gets up, sings the national anthem. People are excited. Candace Burke, who's the race director, she gets up and kind of, you know, gives you a pep talk, and then there's a 10-second countdown, and kind of those nerves and butterflies kind of, you know, ideally they're kind of going away because you're just going to go do the work.
You're going to go do the work, yeah.
Go do the work.
Okay, but you make it sound like it was a clean start. It wasn't quite an undistracted lead up.
Yeah, that's true. You know, so I had been managing this health situation with these hives comfortably throughout the year, but the way that I'd managed that medically from my doc was that I would take some Benadryl each night. So 2 tablets of Benadryl. Usually that would mean that it would never, the hives would never really move up into kind of my head or my mouth or throat. I would oftentimes wake up with a couple of welts somewhere on kind of my trunk or torso, right? From pressure, or hot or cold or something like that, right? So, but it have been totally manageable. Now, the only issue with taking Benadryl is it does give some drowsiness. So it works fine taking it the night before and you sleep on it. But I reached out to my doc and said, I don't really want to be taking Benadryl during this multi-day thing where I'm not going to be getting a lot of sleep. I'll already be drowsy. And so they're like, well, we can give you a shot that will reduce some inflammation. You should be fine. But I woke up the day of the race and I had a welt on the bottom of my foot.
Okay, time out. Like, I need to understand that.
Yeah.
So, game day, you wake up, it's 4, you're eating your oatmeal, and you have a welt in the bottom of your foot.
Yeah, so it just feels like it's swollen, and as I walk on it, it feels like
That's a weird place for a
weird. And it
hive.
happens sometimes.
On your feet?
I'll get them on my foot or on my hand. If I like do some work in the yard with a shovel or something, my hands will swell.
Okay, so
something about that.
walking did something.
And the challenge was we had checked in the day before, but it wasn't like I'd gone out and done a bunch of running, and usually they haven't shown up on my foot. But it was a couple days not on the Benadryl, so it was possible that like the shot they'd given me wasn't really working. So I reached out to my doc and said, should I be taking anything orally? And so they did prescribe me some pills to help manage that swelling, right? And so this is more in kind of the prednisone category, which is an anti-inflammatory that were prescribed to me for taking orally.
Well, how did that feel? That can't feel great. That's annoying. You're sitting here, you've done all that work, you've gotten yourself there, and now you got a flipping welt in the bottom of your foot.
Yeah, it was disconcerting.
Okay, so you're a little disconcerted, but you're like, how do you get to the decision tree that says, okay, yeah, I'm good to go in the race? It just wasn't bad enough.
I had really had no significant issues from that health issue for 9 months, so it really didn't enter my mind. I felt like, okay, so
good.
The medication we've got is going to manage it fine.
Okay.
I'm going to get through the race. It's not going to be a challenge at all.
And so almost like the shot that you'd gotten is like, it's a preventive, proactive. It's not an acute issue that you were solving at that point. You're just getting something in case.
Lasts for 2 or 3 weeks.
Okay, good.
I don't have to take any antihistamines during the race.
Okay.
That should manage it comfortably. And it was sort of out of sight, out of mind. Now the welt sort of brought that back, like, oh, wait a second, maybe that's not going to be enough, right? And
okay, so now this is in the back of your mind. You're on the starting line. You're in your shoes with a welt.
Yeah. And this feels like, so sort of like under the ball of my foot, it felt like it was about this big around.
Oh my gosh,
and this feels like
it's big.
Like it's swollen.
Yeah.
And is this going to persist or not?
Okay. But you just start the race because you're Mark, and that's what you're going to do.
Yeah, it's manageable. And I do have gotten welts on my body, and they generally, if I have them in the morning, they're gone by noon. So it's not as if it's...
So you're going to start the race. Your assumption is that this is going to run according to normal. Okay. Yeah, that's helpful. Okay, so we start the race.
Yeah.
Let's start moving through the first quarter of your... So how many stations would that be? 3 or 4 stations worth of running? How are you feeling? Like, what are you seeing? Your legs? What's your mindset?
Yeah.
How are you gauging whether or not you're good or not good? Just give me a couple bullets on the first quarter of this race.
Yeah, so that conservative approach for me is zone 1, zone 2 heart rate.
And that was your
that's the goal
guide on this.
And so I've got my Chorus watch on, and I know what my zone 1, zone 2 levels look like. I've got essentially the heads up display I've got on my watch is heart rate at the top, time in race, time of day, and miles that I've covered. And that's the data that I kind of wanted for the race. Now I have more detailed data. I can look at cadence and all kinds of data that I want to dig into.
But heart rate was your main...
Heart rate was the guide.
And when you were using that guide, are you hitting at your first station, how far was that? 13?
9 miles.
So 9 miles in, and you're like, okay, I'm good.
So we're a mile or two on the roads through a Moab neighborhood. And then we start to kind of just go up onto a trail that's running parallel along the mountains that sit alongside the bluffs that sit alongside Moab, and just running parallel with the city, going through the city. So it's dark for the first 45 minutes or an hour. The sun's starting to come up. Beautiful red rocks, nice rolling trail.
Yeah.
And you just kind of settle in and just say, I'm just going to kind of get comfortable with zone 1, zone 2 workouts. So it's just, everything's feeling great. Feels good. I'm not pushing too hard. I feel comfortable with my gear, with my body. Everything feels right. And
so aid station number 1,
yep.
aid station number 2 the same?
Number 2 is going to be for first cruise station. So we kind of do a big climb up to the top of the plateaus outside of Moab and run across the top of this big plateau and then drop down towards the Colorado River toward the Amasa Back aid station.
Sounds beautiful, actually.
Gorgeous, beautiful. It's getting a little bit warmer. Starting to sweat a little bit.
So you're peeling layers, trying to hydrate.
I had made a decision, good or bad, for the first time to wear like a long sleeve shade, very light fabric kind of shade.
Yeah, a UVF kind of thing.
UVF kind of a thing.
Sunblock.
I'd seen people, with enough kind of sun. It was kind of that or a lot of sunscreen and felt like I didn't want to put my skin through all that. So I wasn't doing a lot of layers on and off because I had basically just a single layer on with a hood and long sleeves. And I think that ended up working well. But first big dropping downhill, but everything felt good about that. I went into Amasa Back, which I think is around 17 miles, seeing Janae as my crew for the first time.
All systems go.
Everything
the hive on the bottom of your foot was a no issue anymore.
No issues.
Oh, it's gone. It disappeared.
Didn't feel it. It wasn't bothering me.
Okay.
Wasn't an issue. So overall felt good. Now I did have a strategy in addition to kind of conservative movement. Zone 1, Zone 2 was take ample time at aid stations to fully hydrate, get some food on board, real food. Historically in anything less than 100 miles, I was sort of living mostly on gel as, goos.
Yeah, but you wanted to get real food.
I wanted real food because I knew I needed it for this sort of a long effort.
Which is really good when the aid station actually has it.
Yeah, and they made an effort to actually have it.
Was there a couple circumstances where they did not?
They always had some level of real food there.
Did they? You said
so
the hydration there a couple times when it was a little bit low.
Yeah, so after Amasa Back, I got out of there probably within a half an hour, and then started to cruise along these amazing bluffs overlooking the Colorado River. Zone 1, Zone 2, which, because there was some elevation gain here, is mostly just kind of power hiking. I would say these are 16 to 20-minute miles, so nothing speedy. Temperatures going up, which was new for me. I had done some sauna training ahead of time, a little bit of heat acclimation training to try and be prepared for that. But the consistent steady heat started to be, a little bit challenging in the afternoon. After Amasa Back, the next aid station was, I think, Base Camp. Is the name of it. And at Base Camp, I heard some of the...
So before mile 30, at mile 30?
This is around mile 30, 35, something like that.
And so you've been running in the heat. It's probably, 1 o'clock for you or something?
Mid-afternoon, yeah. Getting into the afternoon heat, starting to pick up a little bit. Some of the aid station folks were saying, hey, we're running low on water. I could hear them sort of chattering between themselves, right?
Okay.
I was able to top off my bottles, kind of top off my stomach with water, but they're getting nervous and water's running a bit low. They're like, I think we're going to be running out in the next half hour or so. So that was a little concerning.
Okay.
They're pulling some water out from, it was a person's house, is Base Camp, and they were grabbing a couple water bottles because he's off grid, I think.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Off grid.
Okay, but that's a little, that can start to destabilize your confidence a little bit. But you weren't too shook by that. You were just like, okay.
No, because I was there when I could get what I needed, right?
So that's hot. It's afternoon, but you're still hydrated. You're on your plan.
Yep.
You feel good. Where are you in the pack?
Mid-pack.
Okay, so you're mid-pack at this point.
Yeah.
Because I want to talk about
maybe third quartile.
Pack placement.
Third quartile. As I leave Base Camp, a guy comes up along me. We start chatting. His name is Chase, and I'm like, hey, you want to roll together? He's like, sure. So we start moving about the same pace, right? And we get to a water-only station, and there's a table with 20 jugs of water on it.
Okay.
And there's like 2 left. All the rest are empty. And there's no one really staffing the station because it's meant to be water only, so people bring jugs of water out. But it was clear that it was going to be gone quickly.
Okay.
So I still was able to get some water on board. Now, the challenge is that from there to the next aid station is something like 22, because between those two, I think it's something like 35 miles or something.
So that's
26 miles.
Day
so
1, 6
it's like
o'clock.
22 miles mid-afternoon.
Okay.
In a canyon in southern Utah where it's toasty.
Nowhere.
And that's the challenge, right?
Yeah.
So that water is getting light as well. Now I'm able to top up, and I've got because everyone had said this is an aid station where you really need to make sure you've got enough water. I've got a 2-liter, 70-ounce reservoir in my pack. So I've got a reservoir bladder with 2+ liters. Got 2 half-liter soft flasks on me. So there's 3 liters plus. Plus I another had 500 milliliter soft flask that I also filled up. So I'm at 3.5 liters of water for 22 miles. And I went through most of that.
Okay,
right?
so you're pounding through the water, but you're getting it.
Yep.
You're handling the heat of the day.
Yep.
You're mid to back third of the pack.
Yep.
And you do that big push from that third station through to halfway, and there's a pretty big climb in there, from what I remember. Like the halfway point is right after a pretty big ascent and descent. Do I have that right?
Yeah, there was for Shea Mountain. Before that,
Yeah.
kind of the big first, we had a muster back, we had a crew. The first kind of sleep and next crew station was Indian Creek, which was about mile 72.
Did you take a nap there?
I did. And my strategy goal was to do that in about 24 hours. Because if I've been able to do 100 miles in 24 hours, and I had seen people in some of the Moab 240 videos do 100 miles in 24 hours, which is possible, but then they kind of were in zombie walk territory for the next 140.
Right.
So I found a second partner, Chris, and Chris and Chase and I basically just teamed up for all the way to the Oasis aid station. And that looked like 16 to 18 minute power hiking miles through the canyons of Moab. It's probably 75, 80 degrees, but it feels to me like 90, right? A lot of reflection off the rocks. There's very little wind, and it's consistent all day long. So I'm overall body temp, and strategically, I do think the shade worked. The shade shirt worked.
Yeah.
But it just meant my body temp was a little higher because I'm fully covered.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of getting that.
It also puts it's pretty good at moving moisture off you. So you're wicking.
I think
so
you're
need,
wicking.
The hydration is
Yeah,
important.
and the hydration is working. I know because I'm peeing every half an hour clear, and usually by end of race I've got I'm not peeing clear urine, so I'm not keeping my hydration up. So I'm staying hydrated and moving through all this, but I'm warm. Spend a little time at the Oasis. I get a couple blisters, so I spend some time at Oasis. This is mile, 60, something like that. And now it's getting dark, so I'm getting there about 10:30 p.m. And I get my feet taped up. I get some food on board, and then I hike. And I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he and I spent 10 miles walking through the dark in moonlight.
After you called it
Oasis.
After Oasis.
Oasis, before I get to Indian Creek.
And so and then you two get into Indian Creek together. And
yeah, and I get in about 4:35 in the morning, and I think the interesting thing there was it never felt like it really cooled down overnight. I was kind of hoping for like cool.
It wasn't cool.
It didn't really cool down, so it was warm all the way into Indian Creek. And Janae was there as my crew, and Jared Jacobs, a friend of mine who was going to pace me for a good chunk of the next 50 miles of the race, was the plan. Met him there. It was my first time coming into a sleep aid station like this ever in any of my training.
Right.
And it was weird in that the aid station was up here and the parking lot was a quarter mile over here.
Oh.
And we didn't really quite get our balance of like checking in, getting to the car, getting some food, all of that. So we kind of did an up and back 2 or 3 times. And I decided I want to try and get 2 or 3 hours horizontal, even if I didn't sleep very much there, which I did. But by the time I got checked in, got some food, got laid down, and it was I kind of got a little bit cooler because I had stopped there. But I put on a super heavy down jacket, fleece pants, socks, dry clothes, everything dry, and then I'd cover it with a bunch of heat, and I put 2 sleeping bags over me.
You did layer change in this step?
I did a layer change here, but the challenge was I woke up I did fall asleep for a little bit. I woke up about an hour later and I was on fire.
You're too hot.
I was way too hot. And so I stripped everything off. I opened the door. It wasn't that much cooler outside, but I basically tried to cool down a little bit. The end of all that is that when I finally left Indian Creek that morning, I hadn't really ever cooled down overnight, and we went right out into the sun. And Jared and I did, and that leg was the leg I think I suffered the most on. I just felt like my body temp was high, and we went right out into a hot day.
This was like 7, 8
Post Indian
o'clock.
Creek, 72 miles, and we didn't leave because I got there around 4:30, 5:30 in the morning, so it was close to 24 hours, kind of according
You
to
left
goal.
around what, 8 or something?
9:30, 10.
Okay, so you were right in the middle of the day there.
Yeah, went out hot there.
So now you were maintaining discipline with your strategy.
Yeah.
This is where it gets hard, right? Like,
The
because you
first
want to
day I
maintain.
felt like I could go faster, but I shouldn't. That first segment from Indian Creek to the island, I think it's called, I wanted to go faster, but I couldn't. I felt like I was overheating.
Yeah. Okay.
And I didn't feel very good. And for the first time I started to question, I'm not sure I can finish this right. It's possible I might not finish this.
So you were suffering a little bit.
I was suffering a little bit.
Okay.
And enough that to cool down. It was hot enough to cool down. And I was drinking a lot, but I just couldn't get my body temp down. There were these Moab had floods and monsoon rains like 2 weeks before. So you'd see a lot of washout stuff from a couple weeks before. There was flooding in downtown Moab. There were a few leftover puddles filled with mud, muddy puddles and washouts that had a little bit of water in them that I was dipping my shirt or my hat in these puddles of mud just so I could get some way to cool down. And I even found one that was about 1.5 feet deep that I went and sat in up to my waist for about 10 minutes just to try and lower my temp. But on the way into the island, I was like, I'm kind of suffering here. I don't feel great.
Okay.
My brain still couldn't wrap itself around 240 miles, and I was only 85 miles in. I'm thinking, I have 160 miles to go. I'm suffering a little bit. I'm not moving very well. And I was feeling kind of tired. So we got into the island, and I was like, I think I'm going to take a nap.
What mile is the island?
85.
So it's not even, you're still 40 miles out of Shea?
Yeah, 40 miles out of Shea. And I'm starting to question whether or not I can get to the Shea cutoff time.
Okay.
I'm starting to get nervous about that. So I nap. I lay down for 45 minutes. I don't really fall asleep. It's not a sleep aid station. They had a cot there. The medic who checked me in, a guy named Toby, I got up out of the island. I got up out of the cot and knew I had to keep moving. And Toby was there. He was a medic duty or support duty there at the island. And I said, hey, your advice was super helpful at the start. Can you kind of here's the things that don't feel like they're going well for me. Can you kind of talk me through this? And he just validated that everything as I was experiencing was normal, right? So he's like, here's what you should do. You just need to break it down into the next aid station. Have a successful walk between here and Bridger Jack. That's all I want you to focus on right now. Don't think about Shea. Don't think about the finish. Just go have a good walk between here and Bridger Jack. Point to point, right? And you gave me some advice probably 60, 80 miles from here, to kind of celebrate those point-to-point wins. And so Jared and I left. Now, the amazing thing about Jared, he had the most he had ever run in his life, and he's super fit, 5 years younger than me, super fast. The max he'd ever run before was 25 miles. He'd never even done a full marathon.
This is long for him too.
This is long for him.
So did he tell you that I texted him?
He did. He said you gave him some advice.
I did give him advice.
Yes.
So the advice that I gave him, I think it's relevant to this kind of event. And actually, I think it's relevant to life because the only reason we do these events is somehow it makes it better at life.
Yeah.
Is that when you're under duress, and I picked this up from descriptions of Navy SEAL training where they were looking at which groups, which crew would do well, and what were the parameters that determined who was doing well. Was it the crew or was it the leader?
Yeah.
And what did they do differently? And the thing that they determined was the crews that were successful were the ones who were like really focused on the next obstacle, the next object of achievement. Like we have to get to the top of that sand berm, or we have to get through those waves. We have to get around that buoy. So they just went point to point to point to point, and somehow allowed them to not get overwhelmed psychologically by the totality of what they were doing. So I wrote Jared,
yeah.
and said, hey, that's something to keep in mind. help coach Mark on some of that
Yeah.
stuff. You and I did a little bit of that on your Mountain Lakes when we were
Yes.
looking at those confidence cones.
Confidence.
we
Gratitude.
yeah, we
Words of the
renamed
day.
what those were about. We
Yeah.
gave a whole purpose to a cone
Yeah.
that was a mile marker.
Yeah.
Every time we saw one, it was,
Every 100 yards.
oh, we loved it.
Yeah.
We celebrated every time we hit one.
Yes.
Yeah. So you were getting that rhythm going then.
Yeah, Bridger Jack felt like, and Jared and I had a meaningful conversation, which I think was helpful that way. We just kind of
And it helped.
talked
It helped
about
you.
life. It distracted us from
Yeah.
the movement. And I would
Okay.
say we were passing a handful of folks as a measure. Temperature was going down a little bit for the first time. Felt really good. Mm-hmm. So getting to Bridger Jack felt like a success. And that felt really good. And we didn't stay long there. And then we headed off to Shea Mountain, which was
A pretty good climb.
a pretty good climb
Yeah.
that people in written form and video form said a couple things. One, this is probably the hardest climb of the event, which wasn't actually my experience. I think Geyser Pass was maybe harder. But they said if you can get to the top of Shea, you'll probably finish.
Yeah.
Right. So most people said if you can get, which is kind of interesting because like it's at 120, it's only halfway there. So it's interesting that people would say if you can do Shea, you'll finish. In part because I think the time they give you from Shea to get to the finish line, you have the ability to move through that pretty effectively. So we leave for Shea out of Bridger Jack, I don't know, early evening, and we've got 15, 20 miles with a massive climb at the back end of it, right? And the interesting thing is all of a sudden, like between aid station to aid station is a 4, 6, 8 hour effort, right? So your time, relativity of time starts to shift a little bit. Like, oh, we're going to the next aid station. It's 8 hours away. It's 10 hours away, right? Like, and so you just kind of shift your thinking that we're just going to go move for that much time. But it was a little frustrating heading to Shea. There was some time in a river bottom that was challenging to navigate because there was enough water there that you're just kind of hopping through a river bottom for a good chunk of this.
Okay, that wasn't clear from
Yeah,
the.
not quite on my brain, but we navigated through that. But then we started to hit, kind of mountainous territory. Now, the good thing is temperature is dropping a bunch,
Yeah, you did that at night.
which felt good.
Yeah. When did you
Felt
hit the
really
base
good.
of that climb? What time was it?
11 p.m.
Okay.
Something like that. Because I think, no, it must have been later because we knocked out a bunch of that at night because we weren't at the top of Shea until the sun was rising.
But it's not that far off the top down to the aid station, right?
The aid station was at or near the top. I think
Yeah.
there was a little drop.
That's right.
But there was a big climb and then a big drop and then another climb to get there.
Yeah.
And I felt like we moved great through that. And this is pulls out. This is, I don't know, 15, 20% grade straight up. And we moved well. I think Jared and I moved really well. We saw a lot of people struggling through this. We saw a lot of people in their bivy sacks on the side of the trail who decided not to finish it before they're getting to the aid station, which is a strategic decision that people were making.
You can't
But I
blame
felt
them.
great moving through Shea, going up and going down. I think we kept a positive attitude.
Yeah.
And it was steady, consistent progress that moved us ahead of other groups.
Okay,
so that felt really good.
So you went into Shea.
Yeah.
Can we talk about Shea a little bit? Because
Yeah.
now we're halfway. It's sort
Yeah.
of like at the bottom of you're going counterclockwise. It's
Yeah.
at the bottom of the clock.
Yeah.
And it's a big loop for
Yeah.
people who haven't seen the route. And I'm watching this virtually. And so is my wife.
Because we got a spot tracker on, GPS
Yeah,
track.
yeah, you guys have a spot track so we can see you. And I remember like that one station where you're like talking about the quarter mile around. I'm like, he's all over the place. I can see where the others are, and he's over here. And
Yeah.
so I could see these things and infer. I'm sure I didn't have it right most of the time, but at halfway, my wife says to me, she goes, so is Mark blowing up? And I said, it's possible. And it's also possible that he's following his strategy.
Yeah.
And his strategy was to be really, really disciplined. And Mark's pretty disciplined. And so there's a really good chance that the second half of this, he's going to crush it. And I started, because you were at this point, she's like, well, he's bottom 10. I'm like, yeah, he's bottom 10, but there's still half a race to go.
Yeah.
And it's a long way.
Yeah.
So, and you got a good sleep there.
No, you're absolutely right on all of that. I think we
You got a
got
good
in
sleep,
probably.
right? Weren't you?
I got a good sleep there. We came in early morning, 7:38. I got my feet worked on. I covered up a couple of blisters that
Were
I
those
had.
bothering you, your feet? Any blisters? That could be annoying.
They never got bad enough that they really inhibited me, but it's because I tried to be proactive and get them taken care of when I
Moleskin,
could.
the whole thing.
I had this Leuco tape that was really thin. I had put some Compede on, which are kind of these colloidal soft covers, and they had either rubbed off or I'd still gotten blisters. So the Leuco tape kind of covered up. I probably would do that preventively in the future. Got some good food on board. Cutoff time at Shea Mountain was 2:30 p.m. That was like exactly half the time of the whole race, 56 hours and 30 minutes of 113-hour total cutoff time. So it was half of the race. And we decided, I want to say that we were, after getting some food, getting medical checkup, it was 9:30 or so in the morning, and we thought, this would be the last kind of big sleep chunk. Let's get 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and then we'll get ready and we'll get out of here by 1:30. So we were kind of imagining leaving an hour ahead of the cutoff time. But I wasn't, but it was a big block of rest, and I wasn't feeling nervous because we didn't show up right at cutoff, right? But you had to leave by 2:30. So we were right at the tail end of anyone who wasn't going to DNF, did not finish. There were about, by the time we were at Shea, we overheard some volunteers talking. There had been about 40 DNFs prior to Shea. And there were a lot of people probably coming up behind who, you know, if I wasn't already in the bottom 10, those who were getting there late were probably DNFing. And so I would be closer to the last. So I'm certainly in the last quartile of the group, and probably the last 10 people.
Okay, so you head out of there with an hour before cutoff. You're probably in, I think you're around 9th place or something from last.
From last, yeah.
From last.
Yeah.
And so what happens from there is what? 40 miles of flats. Is that about right? On a
13
road?
13 miles down to the Needles.
Yeah.
And then there's a 27-mile block to Road 46. So Jared's covered over 50 miles now. He's at like 50 plus, and he's like, I'm ready to go with you from Shea. I'm like, cool, let's go. So we go down to the Needles, and it's mostly downhill, 13, 14 miles.
Okay.
And walking the uphills, jogging the downhills, and feel good. I don't have a lot of pain. I have no joint pain. I'm not terribly fatigued. I just had a couple hour nap.
Okay.
And I had sort of questioned this idea of short sleep. Now my sleep is longer than others, right? But I don't know what my total sleep time here was overall, but I'd probably been horizontal 5 or 6 hours, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
I probably had 2 or 3 hours worth of sleep, and I felt great. I had wanted to avoid this kind of idea of sleep deprivation being a badge of honor if I was trashed, right? Like I was like, I'd rather sleep some and feel good than be trashed. And so I'd had some good rest. We were running downhill, and we were starting to see some folks who were struggling, right? Who were seeing some real issues. Bless this guy's heart. He was sort of leaning over. He's like, my back on one side is hurting.
Oh, wow.
And he had at one point he'd passed as we were kind of walking up an uphill, and we caught him a mile or two later, and he was leaning over a little bit more. We said, hey, are you doing okay? How are you doing? He's like, my back's kind of bothering me. And I'm like, well, you're leaning more than before. You really got to get this taken care of, or else you're going to be out of balance. And he's like, yeah, I'm worried I'm not going to finish. So started to see some people who were physically or mentally struggling.
Yeah.
And
the race is taking its toll by this time.
Its toll. Yeah, you're a couple days in, 2.5 days in, you're 120, 130 miles in. It's a real effort there. But felt good all the way through down to the Needles.
It's a real effort.
It's a real effort.
It's not a fake effort.
No.
At 120, at 120 miles, no more fake effort.
Now, the thing to highlight here is when I was waiting in the med tent that morning, eating a burrito, 2 guys were sitting talking who had been in the race before.
Okay.
And I heard them saying, what you really need to do is to be, the section from Needles to Road 46 is a relatively flat road. But from Road 46 to Geyser Pass is uphill,
straight
and
up,
technical. And if you can get out of Road 46 by the morning, right? And this is the morning. If you can get out of Road 46 by the next morning, then you can do Pole Canyon and Geyser Pass in the light of day.
Is that helpful?
Technical going up a mountain in the light of day, and then when you're descending out of Geyser Pass to Porcupine Rim and into Moab, when it starts to get more exposed, if you can do that at night, that would be ideal. And I'm thinking, how do I get to shade of Road 46 in 24 hours, right? Like I don't know if that's really possible because it's like 45, 50 miles, right? So I'm sort of questioning whether or not that's possible. But at least I have this sort of intel of what would be ideal. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, if I could pull that off, that would be amazing. I don't know how that's going to happen. But we moved great from Shea Mountain down to Needles.
Okay.
And I'd heard this whispering of like that it was going to be road. We had been on pretty technical trails for most of the run so far. So even if I had been fit enough, it would have been hard to move at much speed, right? But I heard this whispering of like a road section. And so when I get into the Needles and Jared's got to go catch a flight back to Portland, so I'm going to lose my pacer. But he was awesome. It was a huge help. And
How many total miles did he pace?
He did like 70.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a huge day.
It was huge.
Good for him.
And he was amazing and awesome through all that. A huge help. But I sort of asked the aid station, like, what's the next couple of sections look like? There were like, there's, well, that was Dry Valley. I apologize. Dry Valley was that aid station there. The Needles was in between Dry Valley and Road 46. Like, it's like 14 miles to the Needles, and then it's 12 and a half miles to Road 46. It's a road marathon. The sun is setting. And, you know, training under duress is something I try and do in my preparation, because if I can run at night or run without sleep during training or run a double mountain workout, I always feel like during a race I can always say, oh, this is easier than the time I did South Sisters twice in a day. Yep. This is easier than the Black Butte Summit, right? This is easier than the time I did, you know, that sleep deprivation training overnight when I did 100K on the
going all night
Wildwood
and then just
Trail.
going right into your day.
Yeah. Training under duress.
Yeah.
So, and I sort of confirmed this at Dry Valley that there was a road marathon. The sun is setting, it's cooling down. I see most runners like bundling up. They got their rain pants on. They've got their fleece. They've got, because it's gonna be cold. It's gonna probably be upper 30s, low 40s. They got their full puffy jacket on. They got their poles out, and they're just gonna march it. They're gonna march the next 27 miles. And for some reason, this idea of a road marathon, like, I got super excited. I'm like, I've got a road marathon overnight. Like, and I'd also had on purpose to kind of stay conservative, because there's times I'll run with music and kind of put some rock and roll tunes on to kind of motivate me to move. Day one, I had specifically put on like total Zen chill music.
Yeah.
And then I've been talking with Jared a lot, so I hadn't really piped into music at all, right? And I hadn't really run by myself. And so here's this concept of a road marathon that's starting at sunset, and I got super jazzed. And so I'm just in shorts. I've got, I think, this actual shirt on, right? Like this kind of long sleeve, but light, you know, merino wool top. Put the headphones in, turn on some tunes, and I just start rolling.
It's really interesting you're describing that, because I could see it online. You just start clipping, and you start moving past chunks of people.
Yeah.
And you go from 9th to like 40th from the back to 50, like 60th, and like you start really moving up. And I was getting excited because I could see your strategy in action from afar online by tracking your thing. So you're feeling, I think we talked in there, didn't we?
We did. It was the first time I think I'd had cell phone service. I hadn't talked to my kids in a couple of days. So I called my kids and just said hi to check in with them and let them know that I love them. And then I thought to call you, and you're like, we're looking at the screen right now.
Yeah.
But I was excited too, just more than anything, you know, there's lots of technical races, and those are amazing to go up and down mountains and over boulders and all that stuff. But I enjoy ultra running for the running component. And so when there's a runnable section, I just really enjoy that. And I'm not moving insanely fast. I'm doing 13 to 17 minute miles.
Okay.
Gravel / hard packed road. But it just was fun to just run and move, right? So these aren't fast miles, but they're consistent. and I'm running the hills.
Okay, so when you get to the next aid station, that's at the bottom of Geyser, is that correct?
Yeah, so I moved for that because I kind of put my sights on like, I want to see if I can do a 7-hour road marathon overnight.
Is that about what you did?
In about 6.5.
Okay.
So it wasn't fast. It wasn't fast, and I only stayed about 20 minutes or 30 minutes maybe at the Needles. But you had said, hey, there's a bunch of people there right when we talked, because I couldn't see the screen. You said, you're going to find a handful of people on this road. There's a bunch of people at the Needles. There's a bunch of people ahead of that. And, passing people isn't the only measure, but for me, it was like I'm making progress. And everybody that I saw was walking. And I was moving, right? So I was moving. And so for the first time, I was like, it's almost day 3. I'm moving with quality. The strategy is working.
The strategy is working.
The strategy is working. I feel great. I feel energetic. I can run. I don't have hardly any pain.
So when you get to the bottom of, what is the aid station at the bottom?
Road 46.
Geyser, I mean.
Below Pole Canyon and Geyser Pass.
Okay, so.
That has 7, 8, I'm trying to think of elevation gain there. There's 6,000 or 7,000 feet elevation gain.
I didn't appreciate this before the race, but I could see the elevation you were gaining and the elevation you were crossing at. That's high elevation. That's a different kind of burn. You didn't really prep for it. You weren't ever working at elevation like that. So it was putting an extra burden on you, but you cranked that climb.
I felt super good through that. I got a little bit of sleep at Road 46.
Oh, so at 46 you took another nap before you started that climb.
Janae was there. Yep.
Okay.
Janae was there. We had kind of gotten that sort of bumpiness of Indian Creek, that first station we got where we were, and this is because she was being amazing. She'd kind of show up with the car ready to go. Okay. Here's the change of clothing, right? So I'm stripping out of clothing and getting a dry layer on, getting this coat on, getting under the sleeping bag, and within 10 or 15 minutes, you got food on board, dry clothes, anti-chase stuff on board.
Yeah.
And you're getting a quick rest for a couple hours. So I'm rolling into there 2:33 in the morning. And again, there's this intel these guys had talked about is if you could leave for Pole Canyon. So I'm getting up at, 4:35 to leave Road 46. I'm hitting this mountain kind of at daybreak. And I'm actually just what I wanted. And I've got this big block of, 15, 20 plus miles. I don't know what it was overall. Maybe it's 30 to get to the top of Geyser Pass at 10,500 feet with 8,000 feet of elevation gain in between.
That's a long way.
It's a long way on day 3. And I felt super great. I chatted with a guy who, Aaron, I think is his name, who had done all 3 of the Triple Crown of Destination Trails races, which is Tahoe 200, Bigfoot 200, and the Moab 240, and he'd done the Cocodona 250 last year.
Goodness.
So I was just talking with him was remarkable.
Okay.
And I kind of kept pace with him for that. But the rest of the time I was moving really well and just consistently passing folks up to Pole Canyon.
Validation that the strategy was working.
Felt really good. Pole Canyon. So that up to Pole Canyon was amazing. Felt really good there. And then moving from Pole Canyon to Geyser Pass, very steep.
So it wasn't just a pass. Actually, there was some sawtooth on top.
Oh, for sure.
It looked rough. I thought, wow, that's a painful place to have that kind of elevation gain and loss and gain and loss. It wasn't huge crow flies distance, but up and down at the top of that on elevation. So that going down is hard. It takes a toll on your body. So how were you feeling about that?
Well, they were technical enough trails, right, where you're picking your way down, pulls out, right? And so you're trying to be thoughtful and careful on the way down. You're not just
walking.
Yeah.
So that puts an additional burden on your
mental burden of kind of picking your
you don't want to fall. You don't want to fall.
Don't want to fall. So that was challenging. And so there were technical trails. The uphill was steep. Sometimes you're climbing up and over rocks. And then, like you said, you went up this big section, you dropped down for a mile or two, and in the first day or two with the canyons, your GPS got off a little bit. So it's like, I've got fewer miles logged here than the aid station is telling me. It says 7. My watch says I just did 7. Aid station says 9. So as you're going up Geyser Pass, you're kind of hoping, maybe I don't have 4 or 5 miles left. It's actually only 2 or 3.
Right.
But then I saw a sign that was like 4.3 miles to
Yeah.
Geyser Pass, and I knew we were just hitting this uphill section, and I'm like, that's going to hurt some people. And that uphill section was brutal, but I was moving in a really fluid fashion that felt really good, confident in my foot placement.
Good.
Body felt strong.
Wow.
And so that zone 1-2 movement felt really good all the way up to Geyser Pass. And you and I had talked about this idea of kind of celebrating station to station, right? Or obstacle to obstacle.
Yeah.
And so going into Geyser Pass, it had been just consistent uphill battle all the way. And I was getting in there at sunset. So that idea of tackling all that through the day, because I knew after Geyser Pass was essentially 40 miles downhill to Moab. If you can get to the top of Geyser Pass, I'm like, this is easy. And I was moving into the top half of racers.
It was amazing.
In the top half.
I was giving like high fives at my house and whooping and hollering, and every like handful of people that you would come up to run with for half a mile, and then you would move through it, and you were really paying it off there.
Yeah, it felt
great.
It was
amazing.
Passing people that I hadn't seen for a day or 2 or 3.
Yeah.
That I was recognizing on the trail.
Yeah.
Hey, Chase, right? The guy I'd walked with day 1, I hadn't seen for 2 days.
Yeah.
And here I'm passing him, right?
Yeah.
So feeling great through all of that. We kind of go up over towards Geyser Pass. Now we're at Aspen Groves. It's beautiful. It's amazing. I run
Is
into
it daytime, nighttime?
It's still daytime.
Okay.
Mid-afternoon. Beautiful vista of this huge valley, Aspen Groves, mountains, and I come up on a woman. She's tearful. I said, "Are you doing okay?" And she says, I'm doing okay." She says, "I lost a friend recently." And I said, "I'm so sorry to hear that. Tell me about that." And she says, "Oh, it was my friend, and now I'm forgetting his name. We were in UTMB together. They were in the PTL race, which is the longer distance one that you do with the team. Her teammate died during this year's UTMB race. She's like, he fell off a cliff. I was with him when he died. And I'm feeling him right here.
Wow.
He's here with me right now." And she's teared up and she's crying and she's sort of in this moment. And so feeling this sort of powerful emotion and trying to be empathic to what her experience is like. And I said, "Would you like, I'm so sorry to hear that. Would you like me to take a picture of you here?" And she said, "I would really like that." So I took a picture of her at that location. Her name was Simeona. And she sort of expressed this, this really meaningful moment where she felt close to her fallen teammate who had died at UTMB this year. And I had heard at the start that there was a racer from UTMB whose teammate had died. I think it was the only fatality this year. We know there was one on the TDS race last year. Still somewhat unusual at the UTMB races, even though you have 15,000 participants doing some really technical races. Most years they haven't had fatalities, but her teammate was. So that was sort of a moment to pause, and just be so grateful, so much gratitude to be out on the trail, having this amazing experience. Everything about the scene was gorgeous and beautiful, and just sort of reflect on the fragility and beauty of life. And that she and I were on that trail, that moment, and that we were sort of celebrating and thinking about, and she's feeling sort of this presence of her teammate with her there in a way that she hadn't felt throughout the rest of the race.
So that experience provokes some real perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. What mile is that?
190, 195.
Wow. So you're coming into view here. Okay. So what's your next stage station?
Starting to feel like, and I would say post-J, I started to feel this. I really felt it during that marathon where I was like, I'm going to finish this race.
Yeah, and that became so obvious.
Yeah,
like the way you were flying over Geyser.
And I'm moving with quality, and I'm super happy about it. And I think I could, maybe not negative split, but flat split. I think I could get into, I'm not going to be in the bottom quartile. Maybe I'm going to be mid-pack. Maybe I could be in the first half of finishers. And for me, that would be a huge win. A goal was finish the race at all. My B goal was finish under 110 hours. C goal would be sub 100. And D goal, kind of aggressive, was sub 96. Didn't really think that was possible, but sort of in kind of tiers of what those goals would look like. Those are sort of the goals. And as I got to Geyser Pass, as you know, I have kind of a habit or a celebration where I'll sort of do a victory yell at the end of a race. right?
Yeah.
But I was trying to break it up into smaller chunks.
Yeah.
So as I got to Geyser Pass, I kind of walked into the aid station. All the volunteers are moving around making food and stuff. And I yelled out, "Let's go." Right? Because I had felt so strong coming up this hill.
Yeah.
And I felt awesome. I did a full victory yell, and Janae was totally embarrassed. She's like, because I scared everybody, like, oh, he just does this thing. So I was trying to, manifest what you were saying to sort of, I was like, here, I got a key obstacle over, and now I'm largely downhill, so I'm celebrating that. And she's like, the sun's setting, let's get some food in you, let's get some dry clothes on you.
So
let's get a rest.
This is post Geyser Pass.
This is at Geyser Pass.
Oh, this is the aid station.
This is at Geyser Pass aid station.
Yeah, which is after the Geyser Pass mountain.
It's at the top.
Oh, is it the very top?
Not quite at the top. It's just below.
Ish. Okay,
Yeah,
so and you've already had your perspective moment connecting with that gal.
Yep.
You're feeling good. You walk in. You give some like empowerment zone holler.
Yep.
And you're eating. You're drinking. Do you take a nap here?
I do,
Yeah.
but I say let's keep it short. There's a chance I could finish under 96 hours, less than 4 days.
So that D goal is still in your head.
D goal is in view.
Yeah, you're in there. I got it.
But
I
only
can
if.
do it.
Only
I can
if.
do this.
But I'm sort of running the math of 40 miles,
Yeah.
which all of a sudden seems pedestrian.
But
All of a sudden feels pedestrian.
Yeah.
And it's largely downhill and on roads.
I was about to say it's
so
going
all of a sudden
down.
the perspective changes.
Yeah.
But I also know that at best, I would want 10 hours to a 15-minute mile.
So you're feeling as good as you feel in this entire race right now at mile, what did you say, 80?
Now we're at 200. Geyser Pass is 200.
So now you're at 200 and you feel the best you felt in the entire race.
I feel the best I felt in the entire race. The strategy is working. I'm moving with quality. I'm passing people regularly. All the hard work is done. And I would say, and I've done, 15, 20 ultras. I'm not particularly fast. Usually I'm just trying to build confidence in the distance, and I'm kind of holding on, right? I mean, I'm not, I'm moving as well as I can, but I would never say, I would say I don't usually feel like I'm passing a lot of people racing. At the end of the Mountain Lakes 100, we did. We had a more conservative strategy, and so those last 40 miles, we were passing people, and that was awesome and fun. I felt like, the last 24, 36 hours of this race before Geyser Pass, like I was racing. Like I felt like I was.
Yeah. It was like, how did that feel like to be racing?
Yeah.
That felt good?
It felt awesome.
It looked like it. It looked awesome from where I was sitting.
I wasn't moving super fast, but I was moving faster than my competitors. And so
I don't think I saw a single person go by you from the bottom of that mountain up and over to Geyser Pass aid station.
I don't think from Bridger Jack to Geyser Pass that I had anyone pass me. You guys sort of said, hey, see if you can find a peer to roll with. Yeah. And I really didn't because I couldn't.
Right.
And so to think back to the strategy from weeks ahead of time to then execute it, even though it was a little embarrassing, frankly, to be in the bottom 10 at Shea, I'm kind of like, okay, but let's be confident in the plan.
There's a moral in this story. The race is not measured on the first half. It's only noted what happens at the end. Right. And the first half is just half the race.
Maybe one quick comment.
Yeah.
Just related to that idea of feeling like I was racing, right? Like the strategy was paying off. I felt like physically and mentally, I was maybe at the best place I'd ever been in a race, right? Like it felt.
It's a peak performance.
Super powerful physically, super powerful mentally. In part just because I think, again, the strategy was paying off. I wasn't going to be in the top 10, and that would have required a different kind of race. But to feel like at a distance I didn't know and couldn't feel fully confident that I could get through, to finish in a respectable time for me and kind of my physical capacity that I felt like I had. I felt like I was doing as well as I ever had in any race. So that felt awesome.
Yeah.
It just felt great. And I'm like, I got only 40 miles and here's the chance to get this finished up. And potentially again in this less than 4 days, which I would even say was barely a D goal. I was kind of like sub 100 hours would be amazing. Right. And all of a sudden like sub 96 started to come into view, and less than 4 days, which is kind of a milestone, right? So I'm like, that's possible. I need 10 hours to get there. So that means a short rest at Geyser Pass. I'm going to sleep for like an hour. I'm lay down for an hour,
okay.
Right? So got food on board, and then, get out within a reasonable time.
Now, what time is it?
I think it's about 9:30, 10 p.m.
Yeah.
And I'm going to hit that whole section.
Lights are on.
Through Porcupine Rim.
Is it cold on top? It's pretty high elevation.
10,500 feet. I'd have to guess upper 30s, maybe low 40s, but so it was
below 40.
cold.
It's cold. You've been sweating all the way up, but you've got another change of clothes because you just hit the aid station.
Dry clothes on.
You're fueled. You're hydrated. Your shoes are fresh. Your socks are fresh. Okay. And it's what time?
9:10 p.m.
9:10 p.m. So you've got a good night round going downhill.
Yep. Again, kind of training under rest. It's just kind of like awesome.
Yeah, you can float down this thing. And it's not too technical from what I understood.
From what I had heard, it was mostly like road, right? Gravel road.
So you get out of that aid station and you start immediately going with people for a period and then by them, with people for a period and by them.
Yep.
So you got to know some folks in the first hour or so? The first 20 minutes?
First hour, start getting moving. And I would say I maybe was a little bit frustrated right out of the gate, in part because I had this vision. And again, it's on me to like do enough research to know what is ahead of me. But kind of as I'm leaving, I'm sort of imagining, right, because we're on these big, there's this, 2-lane wide gravel road at Geyser Pass, and I'm thinking we're at the summit. Okay. And so I'm thinking we're just gonna here's a left turn.
I'm going down
the hill, right?
No.
And the guy's like, I'm like, well, where do I go? I'm asking a volunteer as I'm leaving, like, where's the path? And he's like, it's about 1.5 miles up there, and then there'll be a left turn. And so I'm like, uphill?
Yeah.
Like 1.5 miles. He's like, it's 1.5 miles, 1.75 miles. And I'm like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Like, because,
that challenged your gratitude card.
Challenged me out of the gate, right? And then so I'm briskly hiking up the hill. A couple lights up in front of me anyways. Left turn onto a trail that's super technical. Like, so a very technical, narrow trail.
Okay.
In the dark.
Okay.
With a headlamp on. So again, my gratitude is challenged where I'm like, oh, really? We got to do a technical trail here for 1 mile or 2 down to Clark Lake, I think it was called. In that section, I ended up passing a woman and her pacer during that section. And part of this, right, your gratitude or kind of celebratory piece of this as well, right, was encouraging other runners, which is just part of my nature generally, right? But like, you guys are crushing it, good job. Go past them, get out at Clark Lake, and there's like a road, and I'm like, finally, a road that we can run down, right? And after about 1/4 mile, it turns right, uphill, on a technical section.
Yep.
Really technical, really steep. And so I'm sort of frustrated again. I'm like, where's the downhill?
Yeah.
And right at the foot of that, right? So we hit this road, and I passed 2 guys, and I'm like, where's all the downhill I thought we were supposed to be hitting? Here's another uphill section. So I'm heading up this uphill section, and I'm moving still well. Still moving well.
You're still in flow.
Quality. I'm tackling sections where I don't feel like, as I hit an uphill, I'm moving through it with quality and comfortably. I don't feel like I'm slowed down. I don't feel like I'm out of breath. Everything about it feels good. Past those 2 guys. Right around this section, I start to notice that the roof of my mouth on the left side, kind of that soft palate of the roof of my mouth, is a little bit swollen. Like physically feels like it's a little bit swollen.
So, is this the first time you've noticed something since the day of, morning of?
First time.
So this has been gone for 2.5 days.
Out of sight, out of mind. The medications prescribed by the physician working great. It's out of sight, out of mind.
So
as
you
far
hadn't even entered your mind. You're like rolling through, and now all of a sudden you get the beginning onset of a new sensation on the roof of your mouth.
no welts in my body, trunk, torso, which normally
Weird.
precedes anything that's ever moved up above my neck.
So it's a novel presentation.
Novel presentation, and that the roof of my mouth is sort of swollen, and gives me pause for concern. Right, like
Okay.
everything. It's
Why?
not,
When did it go from a notice to a pause for concern, or cause for? I'm not sure if you said cause or pause, but both are valid.
yeah.
Cause, pause for concern.
I think within 5 or 10 minutes, that
Okay.
I sort of noticed it,
Presents,
and that it
5
was
minutes.
consistent. Maybe it's a little bit more swollen.
Okay.
It wasn't moving quickly, but I
Yeah.
noticed it, and it was probably over a half an hour. Like, it's still there. It's giving me a little bit of cause for concern, and a thought goes through my mind that if the way that any swelling in my mouth has presented before, which is normally over days, hours, or days. If I had swelling in my mouth and throat, that could be a big deal.
Okay, because you've had that before, and it stopped you, or you had an issue.
Never
or...
in a race.
No, but just running or training. Like, had you had any experience that was comparable to this?
No.
No.
Never in running
But
or
how do
training.
you know that it was an issue then?
Because times when I wasn't running or training, if it would move past my trunk, torso, chest, and up into my face, scalp, head, my lips would swell. I get some swelling, and a couple times it had felt like it was swelling in my throat area.
So the concern that you're describing is that when it moves up, it gets more severe.
Yeah, and it's in an area that matters.
Yeah,
Right, I got
breathing
lumps
is
all over my body. Who cares?
Breathing is
besides
important.
looking a little funny,
Yeah.
like I'd gotten beaten up. But it's moving into an area that is
got it.
important for a race and important to keep living.
Okay, so you're cruising along. It's 30 minutes in. Then what happens?
Yeah, and probably an hour in.
An hour in. So it presented at 30 minutes after departing the aid station. You run for 30.
Yeah.
And then
Sort of noticing I'm going through this uphill section. At the tail end of that, just my mind is sort of thinking, if this progresses, I could have some trouble. So my thought is, if it progresses, how would I deal with that?
okay.
And just for some background, I started my career early on. I went to medical school for a couple years, so I have a little bit of medical background, just enough to be dangerous.
Right.
I'm an Eagle Scout, so I have a little bit of emergency preparedness, emergency first aid experience from 30 years ago.
Also dangerous.
Also dangerous. So I'm thinking I should have an avenue to get down the mountain if things progressed.
Sure.
So far not. I get to the end of this one section. We hit a road finally for the first time, 5 miles in. And I pull up my map. Two thoughts enter my mind. One, I have some emergency Benadryl and an emergency first aid kit in my pack.
Okay.
Haven't taken any for the entire race. I'm thinking that would be a good place to start.
So you take
So
a
I take
Benadryl?
2 Benadryl.
2 of them.
Two Benadryl. I look on the map and I see that what looks like just up around the corner is a cabin. So there's a campground and it says Waldo Lake or something, cabin. And I think if this progresses, it might, and it had to have been serious enough then that I thought about getting transport down the mountain.
Okay, let's pause for a second.
Yeah.
I need to. So what's your state? You're feeling good, and you have a pretty remarkable capacity to handle low sleep conditions.
Yep.
So you're not normal in that regard. I would say you're sort of like towards the top end of an outlier on the bell curve of sleep.
Yeah.
Low sleep capability. You function high.
Yeah.
At the edge of sleep, and so you're not freaking out. You're not hallucinating at this point.
Nope.
You're in your zone. You're in flow, and then all of a sudden you get this for half an hour.
Yep.
And it presents. And now you're starting to think this could progress to become an actual problem. And
It could.
And now your shift goes from 96 hours to, okay, what do I do next in the next half hour?
Yeah, I start to kind of problem solve. If this got worse, what steps should I be taking to make sure that it, one, maybe doesn't progress and get worse at all?
Okay, so enough where you pull out your map. What are my options, my escape routes here?
Yep.
Okay.
So, and I don't have any runners around me that I can see. So
You're
my thought
alone.
is maybe I should go up to this cabin and see if there's someone there with a car.
Okay.
So, and I didn't feel tired. I felt like my capacity was there mentally.
All right.
I felt okay. I started walking up towards this cabin, and I thought it looked like it was 2 or 3 minute walk from the trail. 2 or 3 minutes up, I realized I'm a quarter of the way there.
Yeah.
It's actually like 8 or 10 minutes to get there. It's probably a half mile.
Okay.
And I have this moment where there's this chill comes over me that, like, if you walk up there and this gets worse, you might die on the porch of that cabin.
So
this is the first moment where I have like an existential moment of like, if this progresses and you're by yourself, if there's no one up there and you walk up there, you may be that you are limiting your options. You better hope there's someone up there. So this chill comes over my body, which I would sort of ascribe to intuition or divine intervention or something like. That's the wrong thing to do.
Okay, so you get that intuition. That's the wrong thing to do. You're in a totally different headspace now. You're kind of heading towards, this is acute and I need to solve for this. Yeah. I'm at risk.
I probably went towards worst case scenario relatively quickly there, just because I was a little bit nervous about what was happening.
Right, because it was a sudden
and it was
onset.
progressing a little bit. It was sudden onset. It was progressing a little bit. At the moment I had that feeling like you should not keep going up the way, I looked down and I could see a couple hundred yards below me the trail, and I saw 2 headlamps from the guys I had passed a couple miles earlier.
Got it.
My immediate thought was, everything you know about this, you need to be with people.
Yeah.
And so turn back around, right? So that was a key decision moment. And so I jogged down the road, and as they exited the trail, they said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I'm like, "Hey, this is what the situation is. I got a little bit of swelling on the roof of my mouth."
You didn't tell him that. I mean, you're now telling him
No, I wasn't yet.
Like, okay.
No, I wasn't yet. Because I was fine.
You were still
I was relatively fine.
Relatively fine.
I had some swelling. I had taken more Benadryl because I had some in my pack.
So now you're at 4?
And my concern was this: if things swell up enough where I can still breathe but I can't swallow,
yeah,
do I want to end up in that situation with medication in my pack that could have helped?
Right.
So I took 6 more.
Oh, goodness.
It was a lot.
That's a lot. And you don't want to fall asleep.
I was getting a little bit nervous.
Yeah, which you can do.
And so I took those. And so when I met them, I said, "Here's the situation. Can I walk with you guys?" And they're like, "Sure. Safety first. We're here. Let's walk together."
Were they already walking?
They were moving, but I had passed them, but they were moving well, running. They said, "Hey, we're military veterans. We've dealt with stressful situations. Here's what we're going to do. If we're going to walk, let's get some warmer clothes on you." Because I was still in this kind of light stuff because I was running. I was moving. I didn't want to overheat. So I got some additional layers on, and they're like, let's get you into, kind of relax mode. Breathe through your nose. We're not going to breathe through our mouth. We're going to kind of.
Did that help?
Take everything down. It did. Yeah, I think just to kind of.
So breathing through your nose didn't experience the same obstruction?
And I wasn't really having any obstruction right now. I mean, I just felt some swelling, but I didn't feel any airway obstruction at all. And so I started going through, I went through my history. Here's the medications I took and when. They're taking notes. And we're just walking. We're walking downhill for the first time. We're finally on a road downhill, right? And they're like, "Let's just walk. Let's take it down a notch. You're going to be fine. We're going to get you to the finish line." So they're like, right now we're in confidence mode, right? Like, this is overcomeable. No big deal. And so we're walking downhill, and we're walking downhill for 10 minutes, for 20 minutes, for 30 minutes. I'm starting to feel a little bit of reduction in the swelling.
You were?
Because they're kind of saying, so they're like, "What's the best case scenario, right? Wave the magic wand. What would happen?" Yeah. An hour from now, the Benadryl kicks in, swelling goes down. We finish the race. I'm kind of thinking 96 might be slipping out of my window, but 100 hours is a slam dunk, right?
Okay.
Like so they give me a little bit better headspace, right? Like I'm seeing a little bit of progression and the swelling is going down.
The medication is optimism.
Working. Yeah. I've got partners with me, so I know there's both a safety factor there as well as encouragement. Mm-hmm. So we're moving well enough that ultimately they're like, "Oh, we're going to take a break for a minute." So they sit down. I keep moving. Feel like I should update Janae at this point, right? Like so far I haven't updated. Well, one, I didn't have cell service, but I see that I've got a bar or two. And so I'm walking down the road on my own. I give her a call, the phone rings. She's like, what's going on? Because I hadn't called her the entire race in 4 days. This is the first time I've called her. One, because mostly I didn't have cell service. I say, well, I was walking and I had a little bit of trouble breathing, but so I'm getting ready to kind of give the good news, which is the swelling's going down and everything's fine.
Yeah.
I feel like I have some phlegm in my throat. Like I'm kind of feeling like that I need to clear my throat. I'm feeling something in my throat as I'm talking to her. So I kind of clear my throat. And then I spit and I feel it hit the roof of my mouth. I'm thinking it's like some mucus or something, right? It hits the roof of my mouth and then it falls back down into my throat and I gag like whatever it is. I'm thinking like some phlegm hits the roof of my mouth and falls back into my throat. The scary quick realization is that this is actually my uvula. It's actually this dangly thing in the back of your throat.
It's not your tonsils.
No, your tonsils are sitting in the back, kind of the side, the dangly thing that looks like a little punching bag in the back of your throat, if you remember back from Looney Tunes days.
Yeah.
I'm realizing that it has swollen up, it is elongated, and it's now sitting on and even in my airway, my uvula. So when I had felt something, it was my uvula sitting on the top of my throat. I tried to clear it. It swung up and hit the roof of my mouth, fell back down. If you imagine this is your airway, it's capping my airway.
Yeah.
And it's causing me to gag. And I know from that medical training many years ago, the most important thing is to keep your airway open. And if you vomit, you can choke to death if you vomit pretty quickly.
Right. Yeah, that can happen.
So this is a moment when all of a sudden I'm like, things have just changed. Right.
So like Janae's on the phone with you.
I have dropped, the phone is in my hand by my side as I'm sort of having this moment of panic.
Yeah.
That I just avoided throwing up, which was good. I've kind of leaned my head forward to kind of keep it from being in the top of my throat. But
which is not just to slow that down. Like, so getting sick is not, that's pretty common in a race like this because it's hard to keep your electrolytes square and your stomach healthy. And so I don't know what the portion is of people who finish without getting sick.
Yeah.
But it's
I'm not too
uncommon.
concerned about vomiting overall. That's happened to me in races. That's manageable. The fact that something was, that there was an obstruction in my airway. Here is like,
it's not.
If I threw up with that cap there, it could get lodged in my.
Yeah.
And I could.
This is not a low probability thing.
It's a risk.
It's a risk. It's a legitimate risk.
It's a legitimate risk, and I've got my phone by my side because things have just changed. And I, the first thought is I need to get back to the two guys that I was walking with.
Okay.
And they're 150 yards behind me now because I stopped and took a break. I do a 180. I start walking uphill to them, and I say, "Things have just changed. I'm choking now on my own uvula." And they're like, "Let's go to the side of the road." So right now we kind of going into emergency mode. Let's see where we're at. We're going to assess the situation.
Triage mode right now is happening.
Yeah.
Mile what?
210.
So you're at 210. You have 30 miles to finish this thing.
We're finally on the downhill road. 30 miles to finish it, and we're in sort of a emergent situation.
Okay, here we go.
So we get on the side of the road, and I mean, it feels to me like with uvula being where it's at, I don't see an obvious way that that's going to get better. And I test a couple of times, kind of lift my head up and sit up straight as if you would just in a normal posture. And every time it blocks my airway where I can't breathe, and I start to gag.
If you're sitting up straight, you're gagging.
I'm gagging. It's capping my airway. It's literally sitting in my throat.
So your answer to not gagging, sitting straight up, is to do what?
I have to lean forward.
You have to put your head posture forward.
I ultimately lean almost at a 90-degree angle with my head. I can feel my uvula resting on the roof of my mouth, like physically can feel it resting on there. And that keeps an open airway where I can breathe. But I have to be at this angle. But if I sit up, I gag, I choke, I can't breathe. All of a sudden, it's like this doesn't feel sustainable. It actually feels pretty risky. We're 30 miles outside of Moab. We're probably still at 10,000 feet. We may or may not have cell service. I did just a moment ago, but that's going in and out. And all of a sudden, it moves into a range.
You kind of skipped over that, by the way.
What's that?
Well, you go back to these two guys. You had Janae in your hand, who's at your side.
Bless her heart. Yeah.
Yeah, she's not stoked about this moment.
No, she's getting ready to go to sleep, thinks she's going to see me in 8 or 10 hours.
Why wouldn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything's great. Going to finish the race. She just seen me in the best shape I've been in.
Yeah, and she's seen you at that last aid station, and now she's unclear what's happening to you because you're choking.
And I'm not on the phone with
And
her
you're not
anymore.
on the phone, and so you walk back.
Which gives her a chance to now call race headquarters and say, my husband's on course and he's got an issue, a problem, an emergency.
Gosh.
So maybe marshaling medics, etc. So my first reaction is to start to problem solve with Jared and his pacer. And super grateful for them being there. Jared Buchanan was awesome. But the first thing I say to him is, I'm choking on my uvula. And I said, and you have, if you need to remove my uvula manually, you have my permission to do so.
Now, I've heard you mention that. Like, what does it, how would you do
I have
that?
no idea.
I don't think that's possible. Like, I can't imagine. That,
No,
it's not
it
like
probably
you're a
would be
fish and you're
worse.
good. Like,
it probably
yeah,
would
I
be
don't know how that
worse,
works.
right? To cut it and remove it.
It doesn't make any
But
sense.
my thought was, if it was just sort of my first thought, right? If I'm choking on this thing and you need to take it off of my body somehow.
Yeah, it's not like a finger where you can see it and grab it. It's way in there. It's like a thing.
It would have been impossible, if not very difficult.
Yeah. But it's a good start.
But I will tell you, because they're like, well, we're not there yet. I'm like, I know we're not, but let's strategize against what we might need to do if things get worse, right? And so this motivated them to get on the phone and say, we need a medic up here.
Okay, so they now call in.
They see we
So
got
now
cell
they've gotten
service.
2 calls. One
They're
from
on their
Janae,
phone.
one from you.
Yeah.
Or one from them. And you've given them
There is cell service, which is super fortunate because there hadn't been for much of the race. We were on a road, so we're actually accessible. Those are 2 great aspects of good fortune.
These are military veterans, so they've seen or have at least been exposed to training.
Yep.
Some training for emergency situations. And so, okay, what happens now? Like, so they've made phone calls. You're on the side of the road. Okay, mechanically take it out, which is a nice thought, but this sounds challenging.
Yeah, so next level there is, again, sort of in problem-solving mode is, how do you keep an open airway if it's not that in my... So the risk is that it progresses from the roof of my mouth and my uvula to my throat. And then you lose an airway, and so you're not breathing. So that's the fear that's there. So I don't know if this is progressing in that way. I don't know if we're going to be able to get a medic up there. So we could be 30 minutes away from a medic. We could be 3 hours away from a medic. A medic may not be able to get there.
Did you actually have any indication that your throat was starting to swell up, or
No.
did it stay localized?
It was roof of mouth and uvula. So I
Okay.
did not, but I didn't know where
It was next.
it would stop.
And it
was the
happens
next in
fast.
progression, right? And this uvula situation felt like it moved fast, right? So that changed in a short period of time. That it was now
Like 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
It was. I had probably moved a full hour from meeting these guys down this hill, feeling comfortable and better. The roof of my mouth is less swollen. Then all of a sudden, this uvula presentation happens. And so, the obvious progression is downward, right? So this could be worse. And I sort of, the other strategy, problem solving was, that you'll see in movies and is a real medical procedure is a tracheotomy, right? Which is essentially that there's some cartilage right here that you can, if you somehow things closed off up here, if you're choking on something, you can create an airway through your throat that would allow breathing. It's very technical. It even when it's done by professionals, it sometimes doesn't always work, right? But so I asked them, I'm like, have you ever done a tracheotomy? They're like, no. I'm like, okay, so here's what we're going to strategize for. See if let's empty our packs. Do we have a blade? Do we have a tube of some kind? And so we're emptying out our first aid kits, our packs of everything. They got my pack out on the ground. My first aid kit's opened up. Everything's out. We find one insect bite kit that has this tube around it, which is this one right here. And so one of the guys, Jared's pacer, actually fashions this tube, right? So he's working on this while we're talking through it. I'm like, have you ever done one? They're like, no. I'm like, here's how you do it. It's 2 finger widths below your Adam's apple. You feel this cartilage here, and here's what it would look like, right? So this motivates them even more to get a medic up there because they're like, I don't want to be cutting this guy open. I don't want to be doing this. So they're like, it's in emergency mode, right? So they're telling HQ, and HQ's sort of assessing how serious is this and how far away is a medic, how accessible is our location. And so they start to make some progress on that. As we're talking, a woman approaches. Her name is Janelle, and she's a racer, and she has a pacer with her who turns out is a medic. So he works in an emergency room. So he's coming to this with even more professional experience. He's starting to take my pulse. He's counting breaths and heart rate and all these different things, and trying to kind of assess the situation. He's taking a medical history, right? When did they take medications and when did this start, right? So we're kind of getting all these details down. So this is giving me some added confidence. And Janelle's great as sort of a, she has a blog that she wrote about this, right? But she's kind of like, I didn't know what I could contribute. She sort of just is in comfort mode. She just kind of sits down next to me, puts her arm on my back, joking about all my unread emails that's on my phone. She has my phone now, and we have by now, Jared has called Janae to say, here's the status, here's what's going on, because I realize that I've left her hanging. So within a couple of minutes of us kind of navigating through this, I'm like, can you call my wife?
Wow. So
he has called her. Janelle has now called her, right? So there's been a couple of communications, and it's clear that, help is on the way. And so we sort of strategize through all this, and what we're finding is that as long as I keep my head down, I've got an open airway. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't seem to be getting worse. Doesn't seem to be getting better.
So you're on all fours with your head down.
No, I'm sitting on. There's a road, and there's a berm that they've cut the road into because we're on the side of a mountain. So the side of the road is 2 or 3 feet up. I'm using that as a chair, right? So I'm sitting on the side of the berm on the side of the road, and I'm just leaned over. I'm leaned over with my head down, and as long as I maintain that position, I've got an open airway. So that's working, and these guys have contacted the race medics, and they've got all kinds of medics on staff. And so they're like, a medic is coming. And within 5 minutes, they're like, I see headlights down the mountain.
So from the time that the decision to go to the side of the road to the medic showing up, how much time was that?
About 20 to 30 minutes, I think.
So that's like 30 minutes of them stopping their race.
Yeah,
taking care of you. Gosh.
So kind of them.
Well, I mean, it's an intense situation that, like, it's even more intense because they don't know what to do. Yeah. I suppose the medic would have had a background for, like, managing some of those, like, pretty gruesome steps. Yep. And the prospect is not fun for anybody, especially in the middle of a race. So here comes the lights up the road.
Lights up the road.
What happens now?
They sort of, in retrospect, they start packing up my pack to some level because it's all spread out, right? So they're packing up my pack and just stuffing things in there, and it's clear that I've got a medic coming. And so medic pulls up. I am enough heads down. I'm coherent. There's probably some drowsiness kicking in from
that's a risk
of the Benadryl, and I've been sleep deprived for 4 or 5 days, right?
But you were okay.
I wasn't in a position to really observe everything that was happening around me, but they're like, the medic is here. We're going to get you in his car. But we need to maintain the same position. It turns out it's a guy that had helped me with my feet at the Oasis.
So you'd already seen this guy.
I met this medic, Todd Nardi, 2 days before. And he's like, hey, I know you. We were at the Oasis together. I'm like, yeah, I recognize you. And so he's like, let me look in your mouth. So I'd lift up, right? And I would not breathe during that because then I would start to choke again. So, and both he and the medic said, we've got 20 plus years in an emergency room. We have never seen this presentation before, ever.
Got it.
Never seen this before.
Novel.
Very unusual.
Novel.
Very unusual. Todd's like, let's get you in the car. It's full of medic gear, so the whole back is full. So I'm going to sit in the passenger seat.
Got it.
And so essentially the plan is I get in, looking backwards, I put my feet and knees on the floor.
So you're in a prayer position facing
I'm
the
on my
back.
elbows are on the seat.
Yeah.
And the top of my head is against the back of the seat.
Yep.
And I'm in that airway position. I can still feel my uvula resting up against the roof of my mouth, but I've got an open airway to breathe.
And is he like talking? So you're in position. He turns around. He goes down the mountain.
He goes down the mountain, and it's still relatively chaotic. He's moving quickly to get turned around. So I hear him. I think he's going uphill, turning around, which you can see a little bit on the map. It might still have my tracker on. Okay. And it starts to move in an erratic way, but faster. So at least this gives Janae some comfort that I'm in a car.
Okay.
So I'm not on foot anymore because moving at 8-9 miles an hour down this mountain. So he gets us turned around. He's now in communication mode with an ambulance. So there's an ambulance en route from Moab. So they've sort of ramped up all systems are in motion to get me off this mountain in an emergent situation, a risk that I'm going to lose an airway. So that's kind of a restricted airway is what has been identified, and there's a risk that I would stop breathing. I don't know how much it's progressing. I'm still worried about keeping an open airway. And so we're going down the mountain. I hear him talking with the ambulance, where to meet, what that's going to look like. As we're going down the mountain, I say, do you have anything at all that would protect my airway? I'm nervous that it will close. Do you have anything? And he says, I have an NPA, a nasopharyngeal airway. And I'm like, what is that? He's like, it's a tube that goes up and through your nose, down into your trachea, so you can maintain an airway. Even if your throat closed off, that would maintain an airway for you. And he said, do you want me to place that? I said, I would feel better if you did. Yes, let's do that. He slams on the brakes. I hear him getting out of the car. He's rummaging through the back. He comes up to the side. He's like, okay, you ready for me to put this in? I say, yes. He's like, sit up straight. So I sit up straight in the car, and he crams what is about a 10 or 12 inch long plastic tube up my left nostril. I can feel it going back through the back of my mouth, down my throat. So non-anesthetic, anything, right? He just crams it through, and I now have
an air catheter in your nose.
An air catheter in my nose.
No one wants
that
an
gives
air
me
catheter.
some comfort.
Yeah, okay. It's one of the few times in life where you want an air catheter in your nose.
Yeah. So now I have, and I asked him, like, do you have a bag for this? He's like, no. But it should maintain an airway, and if you had to CPR, you could. But I think there's no reason you would need to, because it would maintain an airway if the top of your throat closed off. So that happens. I now have, for the first time.
Were you able to breathe better?
No, because I still had an airway. It was more preventative.
Got it.
So it didn't increase the airway size. It just maintained that I would have one. But it was a life experience to get an NPA slammed in at 10,000 feet.
It's a catheter in your nose, man. No one wants this.
Yeah. But I'm grateful for it.
Okay.
As we're going down, I hear that they're going to meet at this intersection, and so we're flying down. There's urgency, so he's moving quickly.
Okay. And you're like 20 minutes in now with in the car.
Yeah, 5, 10. Early on in the ride down, I'm getting the NPA in that I remember.
Okay.
And then we have another 15, 20 minutes going down. I think it's 20, 30 minutes descending.
Oh, my goodness.
Till we get to the ambulance. And I'm kind of just in this zone of thing, just breathing.
Were you
I'm
having a
comfortable.
hard
It's
time?
not getting worse. It's not getting better. I'm not having a hard time breathing.
Was it hard staying awake?
No.
No. Okay. So you're doing
some drowsiness. We get down. He's like, we're at the ambulance. Guys are surrounding the car. They're like, we're going to walk you to the ambulance. So I'm getting up. I'm walking to the ambulance. They don't have a better position for me to get in because it's working. So they have me climb onto the gurney in the ambulance. I walk up the steps as I remember it, and I'm on the gurney, hands and knees, facing down.
You're like in a baby restoration pose, yoga style.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was just chilling in that pose. They kind of put a strap around my back and kind of cinch it down as if that's going to kind of hold me. But we're winding through Moab, rural Moab. We're still 25 miles outside of Moab in rural location. I learned later that in case things were getting desperate and challenging, the helicopter was circling over the ambulance in case they needed to life flight me from that location. So they had called in an ambulance.
So it's shadowing you. The helicopter was shadowing the car or the ambulance?
The ambulance, was my understanding, is near the ambulance location.
Okay.
So they're kind of getting me prepped. They put a strap over my back to kind of keep me from, but I'm wobbling through that. We're now moving. They're getting jackets off, coats off, shirts off, everything right. And now they're putting in an IV. They're starting to put in EpiPens. So I'm getting epinephrine shots. I think they did a total of 3 en route. I think they've got some IV Benadryl on board. They've got an oxygen mask on me with a nebulizer that's putting some sort of medication into me through the mask. And we've got, I think, a 45 to 60-minute ride into Moab in the ambulance. So that's
okay. So by this time, you've had 8 Benadryl?
Yep.
From your own bag, you're getting the shot, and you're getting a nebulizer.
Yeah, I don't know what was in the nebulizer. The shot was epinephrine stuff, which I think is kind of ramping you up.
Okay.
And I asked them in the ambulance, can you secure my airway? right? I'm still this nervous. This thought is going through my mind like, well, it could get worse, and I just want to avoid that. And they said, you still have an open airway. If you lose it, we will restore it. But right now you have one, so we're not going to intubate you here. So let's maintain what we've got. If you lose it, we'll restore it. So that gave me some comfort, but I still had the MPA in, at least as I can remember. I don't remember someone pulling it out, which I think I probably would have remembered. Riding into Moab, I hear chatter in the background about, am I going to stay at Moab? Are they going to life flight me to somewhere else? As they're talking through this, but I'm not, I'm just sort of focused on maintaining position. And so the time passes. Seems like quickly, end up at Moab, they say your wife is here. And so she had originally gotten some direction to go to one of the aid stations and was told, no, don't do that because your car won't make it. So just meet us at the ER in Moab. So she went there and waited. And I'm feeling horrible that I'm putting her through this trauma.
Of course.
You're
feeling horrible in a bunch of ways. And you have a nose catheter on top of it.
So they're like, your wife is here. They kind of get me stabilized. They get me out of the ambulance into the ER. I sort of remember them pulling me down. I'm still hands and knees on the gurney. They bring her in, and it's just, so grateful to see her and kind of talk through things, but knowing that it's traumatic for her in that moment. And
wait. So you get to the ER, you come out of the ambulance, and you're walking.
No. Hands down on the gurney.
They're just wheeling you in.
Yeah, they pull me off the ambulance in the gurney and they wheel it in.
She's there. She's emotional.
They bring her out of the
You're
waiting
emotional.
room. I don't know if I'm in a hallway, in a room, or where I'm at.
You don't know where you're at
No.
because your head's down.
Yeah, I'm just kind of feels like I'm sort of blind to kind of all the visual, right? I'm kind of in a zone of just kind of breathing and heads down. So I just kind of get these peripheral blurs of things happening. Right. And I can see her walking towards me and alongside me. Right. And I can't remember a lot of what we talked about, but they're kind of like, talking about where I'm going to go and what that's going to look like. But we just talked for a brief amount of time, and then they sort of like, we'll have you step away. And so I think they think she's going back to the waiting room, but she just kind of walks around a corner. And like, okay, here's what we need you to do. We're going to intubate you. But when you flip over, your uvula is going to fall in your throat. So we have one shot at this. So this is what we're going to do. You put your left knee on this gurney right here. So I'm looking over. There's another gurney here. And I assume it's now, I think it's probably the helicopter gurney, right? It's probably got a different configuration or something, right? But put your left knee on it. Then we want you to flip over onto your back. And when you get on your back, we want you to open your mouth, and we're going to intubate you live. Normally, I think it's a little bit of anesthetic supported.
They got this thing. They're ready to go.
They got this. If you've ever seen it, this thing that goes down your throat and kind of opens your throat up and cranks your jaw open wide, and then they're going to put a tube down it that's going to be able to hook up to a ventilator or a bag, and they can ventilate you. So I'm just kind of in zone mode. We just do what we need to do here. So I flip over, and then I feel kind of the full force of somebody, and I think it was an anesthesiologist at the end of the day, of full metal plastic down my throat, cranking everything open. I had this full body gag reaction.
Full body.
And feel the full force of something going into my throat, and then I'm out. So I'm sure they had a sedative live in the IV when they did that.
Yeah.
And they knocked me out as soon as they knew it was placed.
As soon as it was in, and then they knocked you out.
Out.
Okay. So now you're asleep.
Yeah.
And you get a joyride that you don't get to know.
I get a second helicopter ride of my life.
This is a special club that you don't want to be a part of.
No, you do not want to be a part of that.
Like the number of people who've had like this chariot, this airborne chariot, take them to a different finish line is probably pretty small. It's not a big number.
Not a big number, and
thankfully it is a number for you, actually.
Yeah. And Moab ER, bless their hearts, they did everything they needed to and could do while I was there. But they said, hey, we don't have a lot of specialists here. We don't have an ICU.
They don't know what your issue is.
This could get worse.
It could get worse.
I don't really have the staff here to do it. So the decision is made to get me to Grand Junction, Colorado, to, I think it's St. Mary's Hospital that's there in Grand Junction.
Intubated, knocked out, you're on a helicopter, you fly out.
Yep.
What's the doctor say when you wake up?
Well, after that, they communicate with Janae. She sort of appears around the corner like, oh, we thought you went back to the waiting room. We try not to have family, experience what, I don't think she saw, but she heard.
Oh, she did.
the commotion.
Yeah, I bet it was not.
And so
Wasn't satisfying,
he's
I guess.
apologizing. Yeah.
He's apologizing to Danae because
Yeah.
of what she had to listen to.
I think so.
I think that sounds
because he
brutal.
thought she had exited further away. But that I'm going to be in Moab.
Did she
can't fly
communicate
in
to
the
you how
helicopter.
hard that was to listen to?
I've had a little bit of a conversation around it. I
Yeah,
think
a
that
little
fully unpacked
conversation around it.
Yeah, about things more generally. Yes,
Yeah.
that moment not as much. Right, the overall trauma is so unfair. And I'm asleep, so I'm not experiencing any of this, and she's experiencing all of it. She's
Yeah.
got to drive from Moab to Grand Junction by herself. She's calling family and friends, and that's helpful support. But you're going through a traumatic situation that's completely unknown.
She has several hours
Solo.
of this. It started when you called her. What time did this first call
I guess
happen?
10:30,
10:30 at
11.
night. And what
Now
time?
it's probably
she's
1 a.m. She's
the
got an hour and a
ER.
half drive.
Okay.
She's going to be 3 or 4 in the morning to Grand Junction, dealing with all of that situation. So I'm asleep. We have the chariot ride without me knowing it. And before getting to kind of the wake up moment, when I, spoiler alert, saw Janae in the ICU 24 hours later, sometime between the sedative in Moab and them letting the sedative wear off, and 24 hours later letting me wake up to kind of check and see where I was at. I had some experience in between those times. Now, I don't drink, don't do drugs, so this may have just been some hospital grade, fentanyl or propofol or something they were giving me to sedate me. But I had, a pretty compelling qualitative moment of sort of having the sense of being awake. So it felt like a conscious moment. Brain is functioning. It's the first time that I have what I feel like is a conscious moment, at least in retrospect, since being knocked out. And I sort of am seeing kind of these blocks of color. I kind of feel like I just have in my head. I'm just kind of this sense of just like my head. I feel blocks of color and this kind of symphonic music. It's bright and colorful. These cascading tiles of color sort of spilling away from me. The music sort of crescendoing and growing and sort of symphonic. It's getting brighter. And I'm having this moment, and I think to myself, so I have this thought, is this what it feels like to die?
Oh. Were you still embodied when you had that experience? Was the perception that you were having those thoughts from your physical self, or were you outside of that?
I felt like I didn't feel my overall body. I wasn't up above my body. It was in a space, and I kind of had a sensation of my head being there physically, but I realized that wasn't a normal physical moment, because the speed of the color, the music, the light was accelerating. And that was my first thought, like, is this what it looks like to cross over? And I have a belief in the afterlife.
Sure.
So, I was
that
like,
was
in my
your question,
approaching.
though. What was the answer?
Well, I still had a thought process going on. And my first thought was, I thought of my family, thought of my wife and my kids, and I thought, I love them, and I'm not ready to go. I didn't feel like I had any control over it at the moment, but I'm like, I'm not ready.
Right.
I love life.
Yeah.
I love the experiences that I have, and I want to keep living them, and I want to be with my family to do that. I had a sense of that I hadn't been perfect in my life. It wasn't a guilty feeling or a shameful feeling. It just was a sense of, like, I knew that I had my own challenges and struggles through life, and I just had an acknowledgement of that, interestingly enough. And then because I'm a person of, religious person, I thought of my faith, and I thought of this concept of a savior who overcomes both separation physically from family, if you believe in the concept of resurrection, and this concept of overcoming sin or shortcomings that we might experience in life. So these sort of two concerns that I had, being separated from my family, maybe being separated from God because of things that I hadn't done right in my life, I just had this overwhelming sense of peace and calm, that it would be made right through this belief that I had in a Savior. And maybe that's my religious upbringing, religious belief system. I didn't have any vision or firsthand experience that would tell me that was accurate compared to anything different than I had experienced in my life, other than this belief and this faith that it's real and true. But I just found it compelling in a kind of an existential moment. Those are the thoughts that I had: my family, my faith, and it really was just an overwhelming feeling of peace and comfort. And even though I don't even know that I would say it wasn't fear that my life was over, just more a little bit of maybe sadness. Like, I don't want that to be the answer, right?
I'm not ready yet.
I'm not ready.
Yeah.
I'm not ready. But I think after I kind of went through that thought process, but feeling very peaceful, very calm, and sort of, again, this sort of physical experience of the way, or the perception of a physical experience was just kind of growing color, speed, symphonic music, light, accelerating. I just sort of rode that for, I'm sure it was seconds, right? Like, this whole process feels to me like it was 30 or 60 seconds. But I just sort of rode that kind of wave of light and sound and color, and kind of into when I didn't know what would be next, right? Like, am I seeing my grandparents who've passed away? Which would be sort of the experience I would anticipate or expect.
Right.
If the next phase was, you died and you're moving on to the next chapter. Fortunately, and this was separated in time, at least in my experience, my next perceived moment was waking up in an intensive care unit and looking over, and I'm holding my wife's hand. And so Janae's there. And I'm still alive. It's not my grandparents. It's my wife.
Right.
Thank goodness. I'm a little disoriented.
Yeah. Okay.
I squeeze her hand, acknowledging that I'm awake, and I sense that she's there, and I have questions. So I start to write on the inside of her hand. I saw it in a movie or something, right? Like, I'm intubated. I'm on a ventilator, breathing for me. I can't talk, so I'm at least aware enough to know I can't vocalize. So I'm writing on her hand, and she tells the nurse he's awake. And this is planned. They let the sedative wear off a little bit for me to wake up so they could kind of see where I'm at. And they're like, we'll give you a whiteboard. So give me a whiteboard and a pen, and I start writing. And I think Janae said the first thing I asked was, where am I? Right, so she said, you're in an intensive care unit in Grand Junction, Colorado. The helicopter brought you here, and things are kind of flooding back. And the first thing I do is apologize. So I wrote, I'm so sorry. Right, like, I feel horrible that she's having to go through this experience. And then I asked about the other runners, because that was kind of one of the last things I kind of really thought about, right, was that these people had stopped and had helped me, and could they finish their race? And I think I'd asked them there, what day is it, right? So it's now Tuesday night, I guess. The race is ostensibly ended, or getting ready to end, so we kind of chat, and everything's kind of coming back. So I feel good that I can remember what happened, why I'm at where I'm at. So there doesn't seem to be any cognitive issues. But I'm fighting with kind of the ventilator. I feel like I'm choking, and they're like, yeah, that's just kind of what happens. And I'm complaining about choking, right? So they try and do a little bit of suction. And finally they're like, that's just what it feels like to be intubated. So, like, we're just going to put him back to sleep because he's just going to fight against it. So they give me some more sedative and they knock me out. But I wake up kind of Wednesday morning, and they're like, you're doing great. You're setting off all the alarms in our ICU because your heart rate's super slow. The respiratory therapist comes in. You're setting off all kinds of alarms because she's like, the normal person pulls about 800 milliliters in a breath. In the ICU, it's about 300 milliliters. She's like, on average, you're doing like 2 liters. And she's kind of like, let's see how much, this is my recollection, let's see how much you could pull. So I kind of take a deep breath. She's like, you just pulled 4 liters of air in a single breath. I've never seen that in the ICU. So the rest of my body is functioning fine. The good thing is that whatever is happening in my airway,
It was localized to that.
It was localized, and the rest of my body, despite going from 210 miles into bedridden for 2 days, the rest of my body is functioning well. And they're like, we think we'll probably extubate you later today. So Wednesday afternoon, I'm extubated. We're going to watch you overnight and probably get you out of the hospital on Thursday, get you discharged. They're like, so I'm feeling pretty good on Wednesday. They take the ventilator out. From I think most of the day Wednesday, they've got me breathing on my own, not on a ventilator. I'm still breathing through a tube, but I'm not on a ventilator that's helping me breathe. I'm like, it'd be great to use the restroom. It'd be great to, now I'm extubated. I'm like, I'd love to take a shower and I'd love to walk a little bit. And the people in the ICU, their brains are kind of exploding. They're like, well, one, no one ever used the bathroom on the ICU. No one ever takes a shower.
Right.
No one ever walks around. You get discharged from here. You get moved from here into another section of the hospital.
Right. You're in your bed.
Yeah. You're out.
Yeah.
And they're like, but you're doing so well. So they had to unpack what was a shower turned into a closet. They had emptied everything else so I could take a shower. They found a walker somewhere and hooked me up, and I walked around the room, and every nurse not associated with caring for me directly is looking up with kind of this confused look on their face. And the nurse that's walking with me, she's like, they've never seen someone walk on the ICU floor.
Right.
It's just something we just don't do. So they're surprised to see a patient in motion.
Right.
So anyway, we're very fortunate. I get extubated. The rest of my body is functioning well. Like, we also don't ever discharge anyone from ICU, but we're going to discharge you on Thursday. So great care there. And other than feeling super stiff from moving right into bed, from full motion workout for 3 or 4 days, I feel fine.
Yeah, you said you had one of the best runs of your year, like the next week or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's a timeout. Like, slow it down now. So let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
New information in there, by the way, which I'm grateful you shared it. Okay. So at the beginning of this conversation, you said, why? Like the why question. And the why for you is about seeing what sort of frontier you could push for your own capability. And it was hunting that new zone of capability. And what's interesting is that I also said at the beginning that you got a life flight to a different finish line.
Yeah.
So the finish line wasn't finishing the race, but I guess my question kind of goes like this. Is the new capability that you were seeking actually delivered with that? I don't know. I don't want to put words on what you described, but some might call that a classic NDE, near-death experience. Do you feel like that's what it was, or did you feel like you came out of it like changed? Because the way you described it was the sequencing of it, which was I've been disconnected a little bit. Mm-hmm. I'm not perfect, but I'm also calm. Mm-hmm. And to associate a calm and with the acceptance of being human, being human is hard. We're all flawed. Being flawed is hard.
Yeah.
So has that sort of carried forward out of the moment in a way that's shown you like a sort of a success on your original aspiration for capability development?
Yeah. I don't know that I would call it a near-death experience, although I was maybe near-death and it was an experience. But my sense is, and I haven't done a ton of research on those, but I have, seen some firsthand descriptions of what people experience. And I think they have a much more kind of firsthand experience of experiencing things that feel like otherworldly, right? And I didn't necessarily have that sensation, vision, experience of anything other than kind of my own self. So I don't know that I would go there. Again, I don't know if it was, my own belief system manifesting itself as I got an injection of fentanyl or something, right? For IV or whatever to kind of keep me sedated, whatever that was. But in my own conscious mind was still an experience that was existential for me,
Sure.
right? Where I didn't know.
This sounds like
I didn't know if
Yeah.
that was it, whether or not it was or not. I asked that question, and I had certain thoughts or experiences that were meaningful for me to assess where my mind would go in that moment, and what does that mean for me going forward. And so I think it has been an unpacking of that for me over the last 3 or 4 weeks.
Is it changed?
And it does feel changed.
Huh.
It does feel like family, community, connection has taken a higher priority, and always was a high priority, but I think taken a higher priority, and has me thinking about, what does that mean going forward
Well,
for
let's
me?
stop there for a second.
Right.
Like, I want to understand that. Can
Yeah.
I ask a couple questions on that?
Yeah.
Every hour that you dedicate to training is an hour that you don't do something else.
Yeah.
And so we always are making these trade-offs
We are.
to train, right?
Yep.
Like, so family, work, community, church.
Yeah.
And so how now are you thinking about the balance between those
question.
trade-offs? Because at some point, like, I'm just going to say it. Like, at the beginning, I said, it's kind of on you to describe why this is stupid.
Yeah.
Like, 240 miles is crazy. So there's
Yeah.
one camp that's going to be like, inspired. And the other camp's like, well, that's stupid. And maybe it's
Yeah.
inspiring because it's stupid. Like, I think there's something interesting here to understand. Like, I don't feel like I have those answers.
Yeah.
Have you come back any clearer on how to think about those trade-offs? Like, these are big commitments. They're
Yeah.
big hours. And there's a lot of potential... I don't want to say opportunity cost because that's a wrong kind of algorithm, but there is something that you're doing this, which means you're not doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And let me say, I mean, the initial thought in seeing my wife was one of tremendous gratitude. And while it was challenging, and I've been able to put words to this a little bit more in retrospect, challenging to go from as physically and mentally strong as I'd ever felt, almost maybe in my life, just because of the scope and scale of what I was doing, to being ripped out of that scenario to a story or an end result that I didn't anticipate at all, but massive gratitude that I was alive, that I had a chance to just be on the earth another day, right? So that was immediately clear to me that while it's disappointing to not get the race outcome that I wanted, by far the most important finish there was finishing still alive and having another day to...
Well, with capability, like a perspective can be described like I can think differently now. And that's part of what we want to do with training is like push
Right.
our the resilience of our mindset.
Right.
Right. And so you've achieved something here, it sounds like.
Yeah, and I think, the vision was the kind of the year as I turned 50 was, right, to kind of, thumb my nose at Father Time and say, look, I can still do hard things, right? I can still accomplish things athletically that are compelling to me. But maybe more important than all that was to gain a midlife perspective to kind of reframe what is most important.
Okay.
And so maybe that wasn't an anticipated. Now, I imagine that going through those hard things of doing a 200-mile race, doing a full Ironman, which has been a lifetime bucket list thing, would have given me new perspective on life that would be meaningful and important. But this is a couple layers deeper than that in really significant ways. So at the end of the day, I may have gotten more out of the experience than initially anticipated or hoped for that I'm really grateful for now. I wouldn't recommend it as a pathway to get that insight, but in the fact that it happened and it's given me some interesting insight, I'm very grateful for, and it's having me sort of reframe. Now, how does that manifest itself today, and what does that look like? So I had a full Ironman that's scheduled for a week from tomorrow, and having not checked off one bucket list item this year, I was kind of hoping I could still do that. So I've been training over the last few weeks. Now, punchline to all of that is that a couple of days ago, when I finally got a chance to meet with my allergist immunologist, he said, let's scratch that one for this year. Let's get some tests back. Let's get you on some new meds. And so we can talk about learnings, takeaways there. But so I'm not doing that now, but had kind of hoped I could, because I was feeling, besides this obviously very significant acute emergent moment, I'm as fit as I've ever been in my entire life. I entered Moab 240 that way. I had what you kind of called like the super week of workout, right? Zone 1, zone 2 for 80 hours workout. I'm as fit and as strong. I'm a sub, pre-race, I'm sub 180 pounds. My resting heart rate super low. My lactate threshold is, everything about it is, I just feel like a superpower, like the fitness. So it's hard to let that go. And I had hoped maybe I could do this race. So I'm at peace with not doing it. And maybe it'll be a future thing and maybe it won't. But that being said, part of that assessment is, one, I still want to adventure in the future. Where are the limitations on that? I don't know. But, and maybe it's not too hard to avoid a 200-mile race, right? So that's avoidable if I need to. And so we're still assessing what are those limitations. I think here, as I look at those trade-offs, how does exercise and fitness and the time invested in doing that, what does it allow me to, who does it allow me to be? Mm-hmm. What does it allow me to accomplish? What do I bring to the other important responsibilities of my life when I am at my best self physically and mentally, which my experience with exercise is that exercise optimizes that combination of physical wellness and mental wellness for me.
Yeah. So I just want to reflect back. Like I've always perceived you as coming at this from a place of wellness and a healthy place. It's not felt like an obsessive or compulsive place, which is where some people go to for these kinds of things, and that just becomes another crutch, right? And so you're in this place where you've always been very clear how you're doing it so that you can get these other benefits. Yeah. Not just the volition piece or the ambition of being able to achieve something you thought might be out of your range, but also just how it makes you just a better person in all the other areas of your life. So you've always had that in mind. So I think it sounds like this is pretty intense where you sit. There's going to be some integrating this experience as you decide your next year and how you think about what you want to accomplish at the finish line. I'm at a finish line. What do I want? Right? In my last season, what I wanted out of a finish line was XYZ. Is it the same? Is it different this year? So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. That'll be really fun to
It's undefined.
check in.
I don't know what that looks like. Continued adventuring is the goal right now, but I don't know what that looks like at scale. It's generous of you to say I acknowledge that there are trade-offs and there are sacrifices that my family has made, my wife has made, my kids have made. For a time when I'm focusing on me.
Local, that's a real commitment. But yeah, for sure. She was there going through all of that.
And bless her heart for doing that. And I am confident that there have times when it has been obsessive or compulsive.
Yeah.
And so the question is, what does that balance feel like? I have felt like this year, and Janae and I were just talking about this over dinner last night, the morning commitment has felt like that's been the sacrifice I needed to make to give myself the time to continue to achieve a level of fitness that I'm excited about and brings my best self to the day without causing a tremendous impact on my family in the same way. So that's been...
You've boxed it in.
Yeah. And I'm not able to do insane hours, and I don't want to do insane hours, but that's been a way to sort of balance it in a way that feels healthy.
That's nice. So if you were to say, okay, in 6 months, what do we check in
on? In 6 months, best case scenario, we are 6 months into a new treatment regimen. I met with a specialist around immunology and allergy, which has been helpful. I had great care from an allergist ahead of time. But this is a little bit more specialized because I think it's probably more of an autoimmune situation than a classic anaphylaxis with an outside trigger, like a bee sting or, cat hair or peanuts, right? Those are external foreign objects get in your body and your body reacts to them. They believe mine is maybe more autoimmune where I'm responding to something internally. Usually not known how it happens. It usually spontaneously resolves. It goes away anywhere from 1 to 10 years. They don't know why it goes away. So basically there's just management. So
there's uncertainty around the condition. What else we check in on?
I think it is that I've got new medications that are prescribed. So there's a new treatment plan.
Okay.
That include maintenance medication so that it doesn't flare up, big workout days or event medications for day of that are new, emergency medications should I find myself in a dangerous position. So this is some of the practical steps to strive to never have this happen again, right? Emergent things. I've got a little fanny pack over here now, running belt that has all those emergent medications in it, including 2 EpiPens. It also includes a satellite communication device. So if I'm ever
So you got all the sats.
off grid, so I've got a search and rescue insurance policy if I ever had to be extracted again. I hope none of those things ever happen, and I'm not suggesting I want to run at the edge of that kind of thing happening. I want to avoid that. So I think that the main thing to check in on is where is that treatment plan and how does it feel?
Okay, well,
so I'm testing daily workouts.
Yeah.
And that's everything from a half an hour to 5.5 hours in a single day. And so far, okay, right? No flare up of the previous kind of mouth throat situation. So we'll continue to test that out. New regimen. 6 months from now would be, how's my health? Can we start to define what are the potential risk factors of a longer effort that would potentially put me at risk again? And can we mitigate those? I would say, am I remembering the important lessons of being near the actual finish line of this life?
Yeah.
And fortunately being able to step back a little way and still be in the race, right? So to carry that analogy forward, am I still remembering the importance lessons learned from being that close to having it be over? And am I still living my life in such a way where family, community are important, and I'm dedicating time and energy to that? Physically, it'd be great to have additional events on the calendar. Is there a 200-mile redemption effort in there? I don't know. Is there a full Ironman bucket list effort in there? I don't know. I'd like to think there are. Doctor says at some point in time it will spontaneously resolve and it won't be an issue anymore. Now, how do you know when that happens? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. But I love the physical and mental well-being that being fit provides. It feels like a superpower. It feels like it's giving me future longevity on life and enjoying life in the short term as well, midterm.
So, it'll be interesting, and it might be true. Some of the viewers of this might be wondering, okay, but what about the why part, Mark? And so it's interesting. I was reading this Mundanity of Excellence research paper that was back in the day talking about what is it that the people who are winning at a high level doing?
Yeah.
To win. And he talks about his ability to see stratification in sports so clean, why it was a good place to do this kind of study. And what he saw was that it's like each stratification level, he was looking at swimmers, they're like their own little worlds. And the way that the athletes think, the techniques they use, the way their parents think, the way their friends think, the way they approach their work, the way that they move through their days is different. It's almost like inverted.
Yeah.
Work is suffering when you're in the club level, and then at the top, work is something that they've found a way to psychologically say, yes, I'm going to do this. So it'll be interesting to check in on this idea of how the experience of ending up on a different finish line has carried forward a perspective that has you thinking about being in a different stratification, a different world. Am I thinking different about how I decide to go or to be or speak or think or feel? That might be something to check in on 6 months, because I think we're all curious about that.
Yeah, I don't know necessarily what that looks like. I'd like to believe, right, because I think I mentioned at the beginning that historically it was really important for me to have an event on the calendar to motivate me, right?
The same. We talk about it all the time.
And I don't know if that's in some ways maybe a little bit more fear-based or embarrassment-based, where it's like, well, what if I get to that event and I'm not ready? And then
Which
everybody
is healthy.
knows,
Like there's
right?
normal. That's a normal response.
And part of the manifesting, talking about the Moab 240 all year was twofold: was to manifest it, and two, to have the accountability that everybody
knows you're
knew
gonna,
that was my goal. And so now I'm on the hook to prep and train. I think maybe what's changed there is that great to perform for an event. You may not finish. You may do great. I found such satisfaction and benefit from exercising in a thoughtful way on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. That regardless of how I feel at the end of the event, it's how I feel at 9 a.m. on a morning when I have done a morning routine that's really comprehensive versus not.
Correct.
And so I would say
human.
if I never had an event on the calendar ever again,
I see.
I'd like to believe that I would still be doing the daily work because it's that the way it makes me feel is so beneficial. And I think that actually is in some ways not a requirement, but really helpful from a habit maintenance standpoint. Yeah. It's like, I'm not muscling it with willpower. It's not this long-term benefit, but like today I feel better because I did this one thing.
Yeah.
And so there's some, atomic habit stuff in there. I mean, there's habit stacking and all those sort of things, but it feels like a pattern that is benefiting my life and that the fitness part is important. Now, I have sort of carved out, if I give this much time to it, I can do these types of events and I'm going to finish in the mid or back of the pack. And I'm very satisfied with that. I don't have to be on the podium, so is there maybe some stratification, some level there that allows me to feel fit, physically, mentally well, doesn't blow up other areas of my life. I can continue to progress in my relationships, in my professional efforts, in my personal efforts, in my service and nonprofit efforts. Are all those possible? Mm-hmm. While juggling a lot. And so it's a good question. I don't know the answer to that yet, but it is a moment of introspection and pausing. And I think I don't know that continuing to push the edges is required to still get the benefit of the exercise and the physical and mental wellness. And because I still do get the benefit of kind of doing the hard thing today.
Yeah.
Even if it's not the really hard thing 6 months from now in a race.
So in 6 months, maybe we check in on that.
I love it.
Yeah. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good session. I appreciate it.
Boy, thank you for guest hosting. I really appreciate it. And thanks for letting me sort of unpack that a little bit more.
It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Right on, man.
Awesome. Okay. Well, that's that is this Trail Success Podcast. Huge thanks to Dag Hinrichs for guest hosting. And if you've made it 2 hours and change into this podcast, and you aren't related to me, that would be remarkable. But the hope is that this story is, again, the ending was different than I anticipated, and but was meaningful and compelling experience for me. Hopefully you'll find something, a nugget or two in it that is interesting from a training perspective, from a life perspective, maybe more importantly, that feels like it sort of matches that vision of the Trail Success Podcast, which is someone who's dealing with relationships and family and work and other commitments that are really important. It has found trail running and ultramarathons to be a meaningful and compelling part of your life in the way that I have in trying to balance all those. It's not easily done, but I hope that there's something in this podcast that feels meaningful and helpful for the audience out there listening to the Trail Success Podcast. So huge thanks to Dag.
Thank you.
I hope you'll join us back here for additional episodes. I think I'm supposed to say this. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. We hope you'll come back. We've got some additional guests coming up. We've done some really compelling races this year that we're excited to unpack those with them. But thank you for joining us for the Trail Success Podcast, and we hope to see you here next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.